The midday sun beat down on Pine Junction, making the dust rise from the street in little clouds with each passing horse. It was a small town where everyone knew everyone's business, and deals were made with handshakes over whiskey at the saloon. Inside, the Carrington house, the largest in town, Rosalind Carrington stood frozen by the window, her hands trembling. "You can't be serious, Father," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. William Carrington, a stern man with grey hair and cold eyes, didn't look up from his ledger. "I'm always serious about business, Rosalind, and this is good business." Rosie turned, her blue dress swishing around her ankles. At 25, she had long ago given up on the idea of love. But this time this was too much. "Barrett Lyle is 40 years old, Father, and his wives and people talk." "People always talk," William said, finally looking up. "Barrett Lyle owns the bank. He owns half the businesses in town. With my land and his money, Pine Junction will be ours." "You mean yours?" Rosie said quietly. William stood up, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. "You've always been a good daughter, Rosalind. Don't disappoint me now. You'll be secure with Barrett. That's more than most women in these parts can hope for." Rosie felt the air leave her lungs. "I'll be buried," she whispered. "What was that?" her father demanded. "Nothing, Father," she said, lowering her eyes. "May I be excused?" William nodded, already returning to his ledger. "Barrett will be coming for dinner tomorrow. Wear your best dress." Rosie walked slowly up the stairs to her bedroom, each step feeling heavier than the last. Once inside, she closed the door and leaned against it, tears filling her eyes. On her dresser sat a small wooden box. With shaking hands, she opened it and pulled out a pressed flower, an apple blossom, brown and fragile with age. She hadn't looked at it in years, but she'd kept it all the same, just like she'd kept the memory of that kiss. Night fell over Pine Junction. The house was quiet, everyone asleep except for Rosie, who sat fully dressed on her bed. She'd changed out of her fancy blue dress into a simple brown one, sturdy enough for riding. The clock downstairs chimed midnight. It was time. Rosie grabbed the small bag she'd packed and moved silently down the hallway, past her father's room, down the back stairs that led to the kitchen. She slipped outside into the cool night air and made her way to the stables. "I'm sorry." "Father," she whispered as she saddled Thunderbolt, her father's prized stallion, "but I can't marry Barrett Lyle." She thought of the banker with his cold smile and colder eyes, of the rumors about his two dead wives, how the first had fallen down the stairs and the second had taken ill so suddenly. No, she wouldn't be the third. She swung up into the saddle, her heart pounding. Then, taking scissors from her pocket, she reached down and cut 6 inches off the bottom of her dress. She wouldn't be caught by a hem snagging on branches. With one last look at the house where she'd spent her whole life, Rosie turned Thunderbolt toward the east and kicked him into a gallop, toward a name she hadn't spoken in 6 years, Cass Reed. The memories came flooding back as she rode. Cass Reed, with his dark hair and even darker eyes, the way he'd smile only at her when they passed in town, how he'd appeared like magic that spring day behind the schoolhouse, in the apple orchard where she'd gone to read. She'd been 19. Then, he was 22, working as a ranch hand for the Millers. He wasn't supposed to talk to a girl like her, the daughter of William Carrington, but he did. "What are you reading?" he'd asked, leaning against a tree. She'd been so startled, she'd nearly dropped her book. "Poems," she'd said, feeling her cheeks flush. "Read me one?" he'd asked, sitting down beside her. And she had. Day after day they'd met in that orchard. He told her about the places he'd seen, the life he wanted. She told him about feeling trapped, about wanting more than Pine Junction could offer. Then came the day of the kiss, apple blossoms falling around them like snow, his rough hand gentle on her cheek, his lips soft and warm against hers. "I've never done that before," she'd whispered. "I hope I'm the only one who ever does," he'd said. The next day, Sheriff Taylor was at their door. Judge Wilson's pocket watch had been stolen. Cass Reed was suspected. They'd found him at the Miller Ranch. He'd run. The sheriff had shot him, but he'd gotten away. Rosie had waited in the orchard every day for a week. He never came. She'd cried for months. Her father had been pleased that no-good ranch hand was gone. Pine Junction soon blamed Cass for every robbery in the county. But Rosie knew the truth. Cass might have been many things, but he wasn't a thief, at least not of watches. Her heart was another matter. Dawn was breaking when Rosie reached Raven's Bluff. The land here was wilder, less forgiving. Thunderbolt was tired, his sides heaving with exertion. Rosie patted his neck. "Just a little further, boy," she murmured. Old man Jenkins had told her once when he was drunk at her father's harvest party. "That Reed boy, he's got himself a patch of land out past Raven's Bluff. Hard land, broken land, but he works it all the same." She'd stored that information away, not knowing why. Now she was glad she had. As the sun rose fully, she saw it. A small cabin with smoke rising from the chimney. A corral with 3 horses. A field of what looked like corn stretching out behind. And on the porch, a man. Even from this distance, she knew it was him. He was standing now, watching her approach, one hand resting on what she was sure was a revolver on the porch rail. Her heart hammered in her chest as she rode closer. 6 years. 6 long years. And yet, looking at him now, it might have been yesterday. He was taller than she remembered, broader through the shoulders. His face was more weathered, a small scar cutting through his left eyebrow that hadn't been there before. But his eyes, those dark eyes, they were the same. Rosie pulled Thunderbolt to a stop in front of the cabin. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. She was suddenly aware of how she must look. Her hair wild from the night ride, dust covering her clothes, the hem of her dress roughly cut. "You're either brave or foolish," Cass finally said, his voice cracking slightly. "Maybe both." Rosie swung down from the saddle, her legs shaky from the long ride. She stood straight, met his gaze directly. "I've already been the good daughter," she said. "I came to be something else." Cass Reed couldn't believe his eyes. Rosalind Carrington standing in his yard, looking like she'd ridden through hell to get here, which, knowing her father, she probably had. "What are you doing here, Rosie?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. She lifted her chin. "I'm running away." "From what?" "From Barrett Lyle." Cass frowned. "The banker. What's he got to do with you?" "My father's making me marry him," she said, her voice catching. "Tomorrow." Cass felt something cold settle in his stomach. "And you came here? Are you crazy? Your father will send men after you. Lyle will send men after you." "Let them come," Rosie said, her eyes flashing. "I won't go back." Cass ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "You can't stay here." "Why not?" "Because I'm Cass Reed," he said, gesturing wildly. "The man they blame for every robbery from here to Silver Creek. The outlaw with a price on his head." "A price for something you didn't do," Rosie said quietly. Cass went still. "You remember that?" "I remember everything," she said. Their eyes locked, and for a moment Cass was back in that orchard, apple blossoms falling, her lips soft under his. He turned away abruptly. "Your horse needs water. There's a pump around back." He heard her sigh, then lead the stallion away. Cass leaned against the porch post, his heart pounding. 6 years he'd spent trying to forget Rosalind Carrington. 6 years of working this hard land, keeping to himself, convincing himself he'd done the right thing by leaving. One look at her, and it might as well have been yesterday. Inside the cabin, Rosie sat at Cass's small table, a cup of coffee warming, her hands. She'd washed the dust from her face and smoothed her hair as best she could. "You live here alone?" she asked, looking around. The cabin was small but clean, a bed in one corner, a stove, a table with 2 chairs. Books stacked on a shelf. That surprised her. "Just me," Cass said, standing by the stove. He hadn't sat down, yet like he was afraid to be too close to her. "It's nice," she said. He snorted. "It's not what you're used to." "That's why I like it," Rosie said simply. Cass finally sat down across from her. "Why are you really here, Rosie?" She met his gaze. "I told you, I'm running from Barrett Lyle." "You could have run anywhere. Why here? Why me?" Rosie's fingers tightened around her cup. "Because when I thought about where I'd feel safe, this is where I came." "With an outlaw?" he asked bitterly. "With you," she said. "With the man who gave me my first kiss. The man who made me feel like I could choose something for myself." Cass's Expression softened slightly. That was a long time ago. Not to me, Rosie said. A silence fell between them, heavy with all the things they hadn't said. Finally, Cass spoke. You can stay tonight. Just tonight. Tomorrow I'll take you to Silver Creek. My friend Jake runs the stage there. He can get you passage to California. I'm not going to California, Rosie said firmly. You can't stay here, Cass insisted. Why not? Because, he burst out, standing up so suddenly his chair almost fell over. Because I left Pine Junction to protect you. I didn't steal that watch, but it didn't matter. They were never going to let me be with you. Your father would have made sure of that. I'm not 19 anymore, Rosie said, standing too. I make my own choices now. And what happens when your father's men come looking? When Barrett Lyle comes looking? You think they'll just let you go? Let them come, Rosie repeated. Cass shook his head. You don't understand what you're saying. I understand perfectly, Rosie said, moving closer to him. I understand that I'd rather die free than live in a cage, even a gilded one. Cass's eyes darkened. Don't say that. It's true, she insisted. Barrett Lyle has had 2 wives, Cass. Both dead. I don't intend to be the third. Cass went very still. What are you saying? I'm saying people talk. His first wife fell down the stairs. The second took ill suddenly. No one can prove anything. But, and your father knows this? Rosie laughed bitterly. My father doesn't care. All he sees is the bank, the business, the money. I'm just another thing to trade. Cass cursed under his breath. You need to rest, he finally said. You've been riding all night. Take the bed, I'll keep watch. Rosie was suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. What about you? I'll be fine, he said, already moving toward the door. Sleep. We'll figure this out later. Rosie wanted to argue, but the soft bed was calling to her. She lay down, not even bothering to remove her boots. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Cass, sitting in a chair by the window, a rifle across his knees, his dark eyes watching the road. William. Carrington slammed his fist on the table. What do you mean she's gone? The stable boy cowered. Her room's empty, sir, and Thunderbolt's missing. William's face turned red with fury. Saddle my horse and send for Barrett Lyle. Now. An hour later, Barrett Lyle sat in William's study, his thin fingers steepled in front of him. Unlike William, who was pacing and fuming, Barrett was eerily calm. She'll have gone to him, of course, Barrett said. William stopped pacing. Him? Who? Barrett smiled coldly. Don't tell me you've forgotten. The Reed boy? The one she used to meet in that orchard. William's face paled. That was years ago. He's long gone. Not as gone as you think, Barrett said. He has a place out past Raven's Bluff, working a patch of land that should have been mine. How do you know this? Barrett shrugged. I make it my business to know things, William, especially about those who interest me. William's eyes narrowed. And Reed interests you? He has something I want, Barrett said, standing. 2 things now, it seems. My daughter is not a thing, William said, his voice hard. Barrett smiled that cold smile again. Of course not. She's to be my wife. I'll gather some men and retrieve her. I'm coming with you, William said. Barrett shook his head. No need, I'll bring her back safely. She's my daughter. And soon to be my wife, Barrett countered. Trust me, William. I'll handle this delicately. As Barrett left, William felt a strange unease settle over him. For the first time, he wondered if he'd made the right decision in promising Rosie to Barrett Lyle. Rosie woke to the smell of cooking. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it all came flooding. Back, her escape, the night ride, finding Cass, she sat up quickly. The cabin was dim, evening light filtering through the windows. She'd slept the whole day away. Cass stood at the stove, his back to her. He'd changed his shirt, she noticed. This one was blue, faded from many washings. How long did I sleep? She asked, her voice rough from sleep. Cass turned. About 10 hours. You needed it. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, embarrassed that he'd watched her sleep. You should have woken me. Why? So you could be tired and cranky? He asked, a small smile playing at his lips. It was the first time he'd smiled since she'd arrived, and it transformed his face. "I'm not cranky," she protested, but she was smiling too. "Hungry?" he asked, nodding toward the pot on the stove. "Starving," she admitted. He dished up 2 bowls of stew and set them on the table. As they ate, Rosie found herself studying him. He was different from the boy she'd known, harder in some ways, more reserved. But sometimes, when he didn't think she was looking, she'd catch a glimpse of the Cass she remembered. "What?" he asked, catching her staring. "Nothing," she said quickly. "The stew is good." He raised an eyebrow like he didn't believe her but didn't press. After dinner, they sat on his small porch, watching the stars come out. Rosie felt more at peace than she had in years. "We need to talk about tomorrow," Cass said, breaking the comfortable silence. Rosie tensed. "I told you I'm not going to California." "They'll come looking for you, Rosie. Let them look." Cass sighed. "It's not that simple." "It is to me," Rosie said, turning to face him. "Cass, I've spent 6 years doing what was expected of me, being the good daughter. And where did it get me? About to be married off to a man who might kill me." "You don't know that for sure," Cass said, but his tone suggested he believed her. "I know enough," Rosie said. "I know I'd rather take my chances out here with you." Cass was quiet for a long moment. "I can't give you a house like your father's, or a name that isn't whispered with suspicion, or a future that's certain." Rosie reached out, her hand finding his in the darkness. "You gave me my first kiss," she said softly. "Now I want the last one too." Cass's fingers tightened around hers. In the moonlight, his face was a study in shadows and light. But his eyes were full of something that made her heart beat faster. "Rosie?" he began, his voice rough. But whatever he was going to say was lost as the sound of approaching horses broke the night silence. Cass was on his feet in an instant, pulling Rosie up with him. "Inside," he ordered. "Now." They rushed into the cabin. Cass grabbed his rifle and extinguished the lamp. "How many?" Rosie whispered. 4, maybe 5, Cass said, peering out the window. "Get under the bed. Don't make a sound." "I'm not hiding," Rosie said firmly. Cass turned to her, his expression fierce. "This isn't a game, Rosie. These men won't hesitate to shoot me and drag you back." "All the more reason I should stand with you," she insisted. A voice called out, from the darkness, "Reed, we know you're in there. Send out the Carrington girl and maybe we won't burn this place to the ground." Rosie recognized that voice. Tom Wilson, one of Barrett's men. Cass swore under his breath. "Stay behind me," he said to Rosie. Then, louder, "What business do you have here, Wilson?" "You know damn well what business," Wilson called back. "The girl. Hand her over and we'll be on our way." "And if I don't?" Cass challenged. A shot rang out, the bullet splintering the wood of the doorframe. "That's your answer," Wilson said. Cass pushed Rosie further back into the shadows. "Is her father—" "And with you," he called out, a pause. "No, just us and Mr. Lyle." Rosie's blood ran cold. Barrett was here. "Rosalind," a new voice called, smooth and cultured. "Barrett Lyle. Your father is very upset. Come out now and all will be forgiven." "Like your wives were forgiven?" Rosie whispered, though not loud enough for anyone outside to hear. Cass glanced. At her, his expression grim. "We're outnumbered." "What do we do?" Rosie asked. Cass was silent for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "There's a back way out. Through the root cellar. It comes up in the field beyond the corn. If you follow the creek, it'll take you to my friend Jake's place. Tell him I sent you." "I'm not leaving you," Rosie said fiercely. "Yes, you are," Cass said. "I'll hold them off, give you time to get away." "No," Rosie said, grabbing his arm. "I didn't come all this way to leave you again." Their eyes met in the darkness and something passed between them, an understanding, a promise. "Okay," Cass finally said. "Together then." He moved to a floorboard near the stove and pried it up, revealing a small space beneath. From it, he pulled a second revolver, which he handed to Rosie. "You know how to use this?" he asked. Rosie nodded. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 12. Another thing that wasn't considered proper for a lady, but she'd learned anyway. "Reed," Wilson called again. "Time's up." "Out the back," Cass whispered. "Stay low, head for the creek." Together they slipped through the back door of the cabin, crouching low. The moon was bright, casting long shadows across the yard. They had just reached the edge of the cornfield when a shout went up. "There they are!" Gunfire erupted, bullets whizzing past them. Cass grabbed Rosie's hand and they ran, cornstalks whipping at their faces as they plunged into the field. Behind them, Rosie could hear the men crashing through the corn in pursuit. Ahead, the silver ribbon of the creek gleamed in the moonlight. Almost. "There?" Cass panted. They broke through the edge of the field and splashed into the shallow creek. The water was cold, soaking Rosie's dress to her knees, but she didn't care. They followed the creek bed, the high banks on either side providing some cover. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter. "I think we lost them," Cass said, slowing their pace. Then a figure stepped out from behind a tree ahead of them. Moonlight glinted off the barrel of a gun. "I think not," said Barrett Lyle. Rosie's grip tightened on her revolver. Barrett's cold eyes flicked to it, then back to her face. "Come now, Rosalind. Put that down before you hurt yourself." "The only one getting hurt might be you," Rosie said, her voice steadier than she felt. Barrett laughed, a sound with no warmth in it. "Is this what you left me for? A dirt farmer with a price on his head?" "Better than a murderer with money," Rosie shot back. Barrett's smile vanished. "Careful, my dear, those are dangerous accusations." "The truth often is," Rosie said. Barrett's eyes hardened. "Enough of this. You're coming with me. Now." "She's not going anywhere with you," Cass said. Stepping slightly in front of Rosie, Barrett raised his gun. "I wasn't asking, Reed." Time seemed to slow. Rosie saw Barrett's finger tighten on the trigger. She saw Cass begin to raise his own gun. Without thinking, she pushed Cass aside and fired. The shot echoed in the night. Barrett staggered back, a look of surprise on his face. Then he fell, splashing into the creek. Cass stared at Rosie, shocked. "Rosie," she looked down at the revolver in her hand, still smoking slightly. "He was going to kill you," she said simply. From the direction of the cornfield, they could hear Wilson and the others approaching, drawn by the gunshot. "We need to go," Cass said urgently. "Now." He took her hand, and together they continued up the creek, leaving Barrett Lyle behind. As they ran through the moonlight, Rosie felt something she hadn't felt in 6 years. Free. Whether it would last, she didn't know. But for now, with Cass's hand in hers, it was enough. Behind them, a shout went up as Wilson and his men found Barrett. Ahead, the unknown waited, but between them was this moment, running together, choosing each other despite everything, and that, Rosie thought, was worth any risk. The creek water splashed around their ankles as Cass pulled Rosie forward, away from the shouting men. The moonlight guided their way, silvering the path ahead. "Did I kill him?" Rosie asked, her voice shaking for the first time since she'd arrived at Cass's door. "I don't know," Cass said honestly. "But we can't go back to find out." They pushed on through the night, following the creek until it widened and deepened. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter behind them, but Cass didn't slow their pace. "Where are we going?" Rosie asked, her dress heavy with water, her legs aching from the long ride the night before, and now this desperate flight. "There's an old mining cabin up ahead," Cass said. "My friend Jake uses it sometimes when he's hunting. We should be safe there for the night." After what seemed like hours, they reached a small wooden structure nestled against the side of a cliff. It was little more than a shack, but to Rosie it looked like a palace. Cass pushed open the door, checking inside before pulling Rosie in after him. It was dark, but Cass moved with the confidence of someone who knew the space well. He lit a lantern, revealing a single room with a small stove, a rough wooden table, and a narrow cot against one wall. "It's not much," Cass said, almost apologetically. "It's perfect," Rosie said, sinking onto a wooden chair, suddenly exhausted. Cass moved around the cabin, checking supplies, stoking a small fire in the stove. Rosie watched him, the reality of what had just happened finally sinking in. "I shot a man," she said quietly. Cass stopped what he was doing and turned to her. "You saved my life. What if he's dead? They'll hang me." "They'd have to catch us first," Cass said, kneeling in front of her. He took her cold hands in his warm ones. "And I won't let that happen." Rosie looked into his eyes, those dark eyes that had haunted her dreams for 6 years. "Why are you helping me? You were so eager to send me away this morning." Cass's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. Because you were right. I left 6 years ago to protect you. I thought I was doing the right thing, but seeing you again. He trailed off, then took a deep breath. I don't want to lose you again. Rosie felt warmth bloom in her chest despite their dire situation. You won't, she promised. Cass stood, almost reluctantly letting go of her hands. You should get out of those wet clothes. There are some old things of Jake's in that trunk. They'll be big, but they're dry. He turned his back, giving her privacy while she changed. The clothes were indeed big, a man's shirt that hung to her knees and pants she had to roll up several times, but they were warm and dry. You can turn around now, she said. Cass had also changed into dry clothes he'd found. He busied himself, making coffee on the small stove, avoiding her eyes. What happens now? Rosie asked, sitting on the edge of the cot. We rest, Cass said. At first light, we head for Silver Creek. Jake has friends there who can help us. And then? Cass poured coffee into 2 tin cups. That depends on what we find out. If Barrett's alive, your father might be able to smooth things over. If not... He didn't finish the sentence. If not, I'm a murderer, Rosie said flatly. And you're harboring me. I'm already an outlaw, remember? Cass said with a half smile, handing her a cup. What's one more charge? Rosie accepted the coffee, their fingers brushing. Why did you leave? She asked suddenly. 6 years ago. You never said goodbye. Cass's face shadowed. He sat beside her, on the cot, careful to leave space between them. I didn't steal that watch, he said after a long moment. I know. But Judge Wilson didn't care. And when the sheriff came for me... Cass touched the scar through his eyebrow. I ran. I was scared. Not of them, but of what they'd do to you if we were caught together. So you just left? Without a word? Cass stared into his coffee. I wrote you a letter. Asked Jake to get it to you. Rosie frowned. I never got any letter. Your father must have intercepted it, Cass said bitterly. I waited for weeks for your reply. When it didn't come, I figured you believed what they said about me. Never, Rosie said fiercely. I knew you weren't a thief. I was, Cass said, softly. I stole one thing. What? He looked at her, his eyes dark and serious. A kiss, in an apple orchard. Rosie's heart skipped a beat. That wasn't stealing, she whispered. That was a gift. The air between them seemed to thicken. Cass set his coffee cup aside, his eyes never leaving hers. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward. Their lips met, softly, at first then with increasing urgency. 6 years of longing poured into one kiss. Rosie's hands found their way to his shoulders, then his hair. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her closer. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Cass rested his forehead against hers. I never forgot, he murmured. Not for a single day. Neither did I, Rosie admitted. They sat like that for a long moment, holding each other, breathing the same air. Then Cass pulled back slightly. We should rest, he said reluctantly. Tomorrow will be a long day. Rosie nodded, though she didn't want to break the spell of the moment. You take the cot, she said. I'll sleep by the fire. Cass shook his head. You take the cot. I've slept on worse than a floor. After a brief argument that Rosie lost, she settled onto the narrow cot, while Cass made himself comfortable on the floor near the stove. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. She could hear Cass breathing, not quite asleep either. Cass? She whispered into the darkness. Thank you for not turning me away. There was a pause, then his voice low and warm. I'd never turn you away, Rosie. Not again. With those words echoing in her heart, Rosie finally drifted off to sleep. Barrett Lyle was not dead. The bullet had grazed his shoulder, tearing his expensive coat and drawing blood, but doing no serious damage. What was wounded more severely was his pride. He sat in Tom Wilson's cabin, allowing a local woman known for her healing skills to clean and bandage the wound. His face was a mask of cold fury. You're lucky, Mr. Lyle, the woman said. Another inch to the left and you wouldn't be sitting here. Barrett didn't respond. His mind was focused on one thing, Rosalind Carrington, and what he would do when he caught her. Wilson hovered nearby, nervous. "We'll find them, Mr. Lyle. They can't have gone far." "Of course we'll find them," Barrett said, his voice dangerously calm. "And when we do, Reed will hang, and Miss Carrington will learn what happens to women who defy me." The healer glanced up, alarmed by his tone, but quickly looked back down at her work. "Should we tell her father?" Wilson asked hesitantly. Barrett considered this. William Carrington was a useful ally, but he was also unpredictable when it came to his daughter. Not yet, he decided. Let's find them first, then we'll decide what William needs to know. Wilson nodded, relieved. He didn't want to be the one to tell William Carrington that his daughter had shot a man and run off with an outlaw. "Get some men together," Barrett ordered. "At first light we start searching. They'll head for Silver Creek. That's where Reed's friend lives." "Jake Miller? The stage driver?" Barrett smiled thinly. "The very same. Post men on all roads to Silver Creek. They'll try to reach him." As the healer finished her work, Barrett flexed his injured arm, wincing slightly. The pain only fueled his determination. "No one makes a fool of Barrett Lyle," he said quietly. "No one." Dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Rosie woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. For a moment she was disoriented, not recognizing her surroundings. Then she saw Cass by the stove, and it all came rushing back. "Morning," Cass said when he noticed she was awake. "Hope you're hungry." Rosie sat up, running her fingers through her tangled hair. "Starving," she admitted. They ate quickly, both aware of the need to get moving. As they packed what supplies they could carry, Cass outlined his plan. "We'll follow the ridgeline instead of the main trail," he said. "It's rougher going, but less chance of running into Barrett's men." "How far is Silver Creek?" Rosie asked. "About 15 miles. We should make it by nightfall if we push hard." Rosie nodded, determination in her eyes. "I can keep up." Cass paused in his packing to look at her. "I know you can," he said softly, and there was something in his voice that made Rosie's cheeks warm. They set out as the sun cleared the mountaintops. The path was indeed rough, winding through dense trees and across rocky outcroppings. By midday, Rosie's legs were aching, but she didn't complain. Every step took them further from Barrett Lyle and closer to safety. They stopped by a small spring to rest and drink. Cass pulled some jerky and dried apples from his pack, which they shared in comfortable silence. "Tell me about your life," Rosie said suddenly. "These past 6 years, what have you been doing besides farming that broken land?" Cass smiled slightly. "Not much to tell. After I left Pine Junction, I drifted for a while, worked cattle drives, broke horses, took whatever jobs I could find, saved enough to buy that piece of land 2 years ago." "And the books?" Rosie asked. "I saw them in your cabin." A faint blush colored Cass's cheeks. "I remembered how you used to read to me in the orchard. Started picking up books whenever I could. Figured maybe someday I'd have someone to read them to." Rosie's heart swelled. "I'd like that," she said softly. Cass reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "So would I." The moment stretched between them, full of promise. Then a distant sound made Cass stiffen. "Horses," he said, standing quickly. "We need to move." They gathered their things and hurried deeper into the forest away from the sound. For the next few hours they moved cautiously, Cass constantly checking for signs of pursuit. Late in the afternoon, they reached a high point where they could see the valley below. In the distance, the buildings of Silver Creek were visible, smoke rising from chimneys. "We made it," Rosie said, relief evident in her voice. "Not yet," Cass cautioned. "The hardest part will be getting into town without being seen." They started down the slope toward the valley. The path was steeper here, and Rosie had to concentrate to keep her footing. She was so focused on the ground that she didn't see Cass stop suddenly until she bumped into his back. "What?" she began, but he held up a hand, silencing her. Ahead, the path was blocked by 3 men on horseback, rifles ready. "Well, well," one of them called. "Look what we found, boys." Cass pushed Rosie behind him, his hand going to the gun at his hip. "We don't want trouble," he said evenly. The man in the center, a grizzled older man with a scar running down his cheek, laughed. "Bit late for that, ain't it? Mr. Lyle's offering a nice reward for you two." "So he's alive," Rosie said, a mixture of relief and dread in her voice. "Oh, he's alive all right," the scarred man said, "and mighty eager to see you again, Miss Carrington." His eyes moved to Cass. You, not so much, Reed. Let us pass, Cass said, his voice hard. This doesn't have to get ugly. I think it does, the man replied, raising his rifle. Now Miss Carrington can come nice and quiet-like. You, Reed, well, Mr. Lyle didn't specify you needed to be breathing when we brought you in. Rosie felt Cass tense beside her. She knew he was calculating the odds, looking for a way out. 3 men, all armed. The chances weren't good. I'm not going anywhere with you, Rosie said, stepping out from behind Cass despite his attempt to keep her back. And neither is he. The scarred man's expression hardened. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, girl. I'm not a girl, Rosie said firmly, and I'm not going back to marry a man who's already buried 2 wives. The men exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering across their faces. What's she talking about, Mac? One of them asked the scarred man. Don't listen to her, Mac snapped. She's just trying to save her skin. Am I? Rosie challenged. Ask around Silver Creek about Barrett Lyle's first wife, how she fell down the stairs the day after she told him she wanted to visit her sister in Boston. So his second wife, who was perfectly healthy until she inherited money from her uncle, then suddenly took ill and died. The men shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. Mr. Lyle's a respected businessman, Mac said, but there was a note of doubt in his voice. He's a murderer, Rosie said bluntly. And if you take me back to him, you'll be helping him murder again. A tense silence fell. Cass's hand found Rosie's, squeezing it in silent support. Finally, the youngest of the 3 men lowered his rifle. I didn't sign up for this, Mac. Bringing in an outlaw is one thing, helping a man kill a woman is another. Shut up, Billy, Mac hissed. She's lying. Maybe, Billy said, backing his horse up. Maybe not, but I ain't taking that chance. My ma would skin me alive. Mac turned his glare on the 3rd man. Peterson. The 3rd man hesitated, looking from Mac to Rosie and back again. I don't know, Mac. There's been talk. Talk, Mac spat. Since when do you listen to gossip? Since my cousin worked for the Lyles when the first Mrs. Lyle died, Peterson said slowly. She always said there was something not right about it. Mac's face reddened with fury. Cowards, both of you! Fine. I'll bring them in myself and keep the whole reward. He raised his rifle again, aiming at Cass. But before he could fire, Peterson knocked the barrel up. The shot went wild, echoing through the trees. That's enough, Mac, Peterson said, firmly. Let them pass. Are you crazy? Mac demanded. No, Peterson said, just not willing to have this on my conscience. A standoff ensued, tension crackling in the air. Then, grudgingly, Mac lowered his rifle. You'll regret this, he warned. Lyle won't forget. Neither will I, Peterson replied. He turned to Cass and Rosie. Go on, get out of here before he changes his mind. Cass didn't need to be told twice. Keeping himself between Rosie and the men, he led her past them and down the path. Rosie could feel Mac's hateful glare on her back, but he didn't try to stop them. Once they were out of sight, Cass broke into a run, pulling Rosie along with him. They didn't slow until they were deep in the forest again. That was too close, Cass said, breathing hard. But it worked, Rosie pointed out. They let us go. 2 of them did, Cass corrected. Mac will go straight to Barrett. We need to get to Jake's before they come after us with more men. They pushed on, moving as quickly as they dared through the rough terrain. The sun was setting by the time they reached the outskirts of Silver Creek, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. We'll go around to the back of town, Cass said. Jake's place is on the far side near the stage depot. They skirted the edge of Silver Creek, keeping to the shadows. The town was busy with evening activity. Saloon doors swinging open, lanterns being lit, people heading home for dinner. No one paid attention to 2 dusty figures moving quietly along the back alleys. Jake Miller's house was a small cabin set apart from the others, close to the large barn that served as the stage depot. A light glowed in the window, and smoke curled from the chimney. Cass approached cautiously, signaling for Rosie to stay back. He knocked on the door in a specific pattern, 2 quick taps, a pause, then 3 more. The door opened a crack, and a bearded face peered out. Cass, the man said in disbelief, what in tarnation are you doing here? Need your help, Jake, Cass said quietly. Can we come in? We? Jake's eyes found Rosie in the shadows. "Who's that?" "A friend," Cass said. "Please, Jake. It's not safe." "Out here." Jake hesitated only a moment before opening the door wider. "Get in, quick." They slipped inside and Jake closed and bolted the door behind them. The cabin was warm and smelled of tobacco and coffee. A pot bubbled on the stove and papers were scattered across a small table. Jake Miller was a big man with a bushy beard and shrewd eyes. He looked Rosie up and down, then turned to Cass with a raised eyebrow. "This wouldn't happen to be William Carrington's daughter, would it?" he asked dryly. "How did you know?" Cass asked, surprised. Jake snorted. "The whole county knows by now. Barrett Lyle's got men searching everywhere for you two. There's a reward." He paused. "They're saying she shot him." Rosie lifted her chin. "I did. He was going to kill Cass." Jake's eyes widened. He let out a low whistle, then unexpectedly grinned. "Well, I always said that man needed shooting." He gestured to the table. "Sit. You both look dead on your feet." They sat gratefully while Jake poured coffee and dished up bowls of stew from the pot on the stove. As they ate, Cass explained everything that had happened, from Rosie's arrival at his cabin to their narrow escape on the mountain path. Jake listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each word. When Cass finished, he leaned back in his chair, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "You've stepped in it this time, my friend," he said finally. "Barrett Lyle is not a man who forgives or forgets." "I know," Cass said grimly. "That's why we need your help. We need to get out of the territory." Jake nodded slowly. "I've got a stage leaving for Fort Collins tomorrow. I could get you on it." "What?" "About Barrett's men?" Rosie asked. "Won't they be watching the stage?" "Probably," Jake admitted. "But they'll be looking for a man and a woman." A slow smile spread across his face. "Not a married couple." Cass frowned. "What are you saying, Jake?" "I'm saying," Jake said, pulling a small box from a shelf, "that my sister left some of her things here last time she visited, including clothes that might fit Miss Carrington here, and I happen to know the Reverend owes me a favor." He opened the box and pulled out a simple gold band. "This was my mother's," he said, offering it to Cass. "You can borrow it." Cass stared at the ring, then at Jake. "You want us to get married?" "I want you to appear married," Jake clarified. "A newly wedded couple heading to Fort Collins to start a new life. No one will look twice at you." Rosie's heart was suddenly pounding in her ears. She looked at Cass, trying to read his expression. Was the idea so shocking to him? "It's just for show," Jake added, misreading the tension. "Unless, of course, you two have other ideas." Cass cleared his throat. "It's a good plan," he admitted. "But where would we go after Fort Collins? Barrett won't stop looking for us." "California," Jake said simply. "I have a cousin in Sacramento who could use a man with your skills on his ranch, and no one there would know or care about Barrett Lyle." Cass looked at Rosie. "California's a long way," he said softly. "Is that what you want?" Rosie thought about Pine Junction, about her father's house with its polished floors and silent rooms, about the life that had been planned for her without her consent. Then she looked at Cass, at the man who had given her her first kiss and who had stood beside her when the world turned against them. "I want to be free," she said, "and I want to be with you. It doesn't matter where." Something flickered in Cass's eyes, hope maybe, or love. He took the ring from Jake's outstretched hand. "Then we'll go to California," he said. "Together." Jake beamed. "That's settled then. Now you both need rest. You can have my bed, I'll take the chair." Despite their protests, Jake insisted. As they settled in for the night, Rosie found herself wondering what it would be like to truly be Cass's wife, not just pretending for safety. The thought made her cheeks warm in the darkness. William Carrington was not a man accustomed to waiting. It had been 2 days since Rosie had disappeared, and still no word. Barrett Lyle had assured him that his men would find her, but William was beginning to have doubts. He paced the length of his study, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The house felt empty without Rosie, though she had always been a quiet presence. Only now did he realize how much her soft footsteps and gentle voice had filled the spaces between these walls. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. His housekeeper, Mrs. Perkins, entered with a worried expression. "There's a man here to see you, Mr. Carrington," she said. "A Mr. Wilson. He says it's urgent." William frowned. Tom Wilson, Barrett's man. Mrs. Perkins nodded. Send him in. A moment. Later, Tom Wilson stood before him, hat in hand, looking distinctly uncomfortable. What is it, Wilson? William demanded. Have you found my daughter? No, sir, Wilson said, but there's something you should know. Something Mr. Lyle didn't want me to tell you. William set down his glass, suddenly alert. Go on. Wilson shifted, from foot to foot. There was an incident, sir, at Raven's Bluff. Miss Rosalind, she shot Mr. Lyle. The world seemed to tilt beneath William's feet. What? He's not badly hurt, Wilson hurried to add. Just a graze, but he's not thinking straight, Mr. Carrington. He's talking about hanging Reed and... He hesitated. And what? William pressed, his voice dangerously low. And teaching Miss Rosalind a lesson she won't forget, Wilson finished, unable to meet William's eye. A cold fury settled over William Carrington. He had known Barrett Lyle was ambitious, perhaps even ruthless in business. But this... Where is he now? William asked, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. At his house in Silver Creek, Wilson said. He's gathering men, lots of men. They think Reed and your daughter are trying to reach the stage depot. William moved to his desk and unlocked a drawer. From it, he withdrew a revolver. Saddle my horse, Wilson. We're going to Silver Creek, Wilson's eyes widened. Sir? Now, Wilson, William said, checking the cylinder of the gun. And if you have any loyalty to Barrett Lyle, I suggest you ride in the opposite direction because, when I find him, we're going to have a conversation about how one should treat a lady. Wilson swallowed hard. Yes, sir, right away, sir. As Wilson hurried out, William looked at a photograph on his desk. Rosie at 16, her eyes bright, her smile soft. He had been so focused on securing her future that he hadn't considered what she wanted, what would make her happy. And now she was out there somewhere, running for her life with a man William had helped drive away. A man who, according to the servants' gossip, had never stolen anything except a kiss from his daughter. William tucked the revolver into his belt and reached for his coat. It was time to make things right, even if it meant admitting he had been wrong. Morning came to Silver Creek with a pale sun and a chill in the air. Rosie stood before a small mirror in Jake's cabin, hardly recognizing herself. She wore a simple blue dress that had belonged to Jake's sister, her hair arranged neatly, under a bonnet. On her left hand, Jake's mother's ring caught the light. You look like a proper married lady, Jake said approvingly, entering from the back room. No one will connect you with the wild woman who shot Barrett Lyle, Rosie smiled wryly. Is that what they're calling me, a wild woman? Among other things, Jake admitted. But most folks around here aren't too sorry to hear Barrett took a bullet, truth be told. The door opened and Cass entered, looking more respectable than Rosie had ever seen him. He'd trimmed his beard, slicked back his hair, and wore a clean shirt and jacket borrowed from Jake. He stopped short when he saw Rosie, his eyes widening slightly. You look, he began, then seemed at a loss for words. Respectable? Rosie suggested, a teasing note in her voice. Beautiful, Cass said simply. Jake cleared his throat. Save the sweet talk for the stage, lovebirds. We've got to get moving if you're going to make it out of town before Barrett's men realize you're here. They gathered what few possessions they had, Rosie's small bag, Cass's revolver, now hidden, under his jacket, some food and water Jake had provided, and a letter of introduction to Jake's cousin in Sacramento. Remember, Jake said as they prepared to leave, you're Mr. and Mrs. Smith, newly married and heading to Fort Collins to visit family before continuing on to California. Keep to yourselves, but don't act suspicious. Just a happy couple starting a new life. Cass nodded, placing a protective hand on Rosie's back. The touch, even through layers of clothing, sent warmth through her. We can't thank you enough, Jake, Cass said. Jake waved away the thanks. Just don't get caught and we'll call it even. Oh, and Cass? A mischievous glint appeared in his eye. Maybe when you get to Sacramento, you might consider making that a ring more than just a disguise. Cass's ears turned red, but he didn't deny the suggestion. Rosie's heart skipped a beat. They left through the back door, Jake going ahead to check that the coast was clear. The stage depot was only a short walk away, but it felt like miles as they moved through the morning shadows, constantly alert for any sign of Barrett's men. The stage was already being loaded when they arrived, trunks and packages being secured to the roof by the driver and his assistant. 4 horses stamped impatiently in their harnesses, eager to be off. Jake led them to the ticket counter inside the depot. "Morning, Charlie," he said casually to the clerk. "Got 2 for Fort Collins. Mr. and Mrs. Smith." Charlie, a thin man with spectacles, nodded absently and wrote out the tickets. "That'll be $8. Cass paid with money Jake had lent him, trying to look relaxed while his eyes constantly scanned the depot for threats. "Stage leaves in 10 minutes, Charlie said, handing over the tickets. "You can wait inside or board now." "We'll board," Cass said quickly. They moved toward the stage, Cass helping Rosie up the steps with a gentleness that wasn't entirely part of their act. Inside, 2 other passengers were already seated, an elderly woman who smiled kindly at them, and a businessman reading a newspaper. They took seats opposite the woman, Cass positioning himself so he could see out the window toward the street. Jake stood by the stage, keeping watch while pretending to chat with the driver. "First time traveling west?" the elderly woman asked pleasantly. "Yes," Rosie replied, adopting the role of newlywed wife. "We're very excited, aren't we, dear?" Cass smiled, though his eyes remained vigilant. "Very," he agreed. "How lovely," the woman said. "My late husband and I traveled west 40 years ago. Best decision we ever made. You'll love California." Rosie blinked in surprise. "How did you know we're going to California?" The woman's eyes twinkled. Young people with that look in their eyes are always going to California. Land of new beginnings. Before Rosie could respond, a commotion outside caught their attention. Jake was gesturing urgently to the driver, who immediately climbed onto his box. "What's happening?" the businessman asked, lowering his newspaper. Cass tensed beside Rosie, his hand moving toward his hidden gun. Outside, Jake appeared at the stage door. "Time to go," he said, his voice tense. "Barrett's men just rode into town, a lot of them." "We're not due to leave for another 5 minutes, the driver protested. "Leave now," Jake insisted. "I'll make it up to you." The driver hesitated, then nodded. "Everyone aboard?" "All set," Jake confirmed. He caught Cass's eye through the window. "Good luck," he mouthed. The driver cracked his whip, and the stage lurched into motion just as a group of riders appeared at the far end of the street. Rosie caught a glimpse of Barrett Lyle among them, his arm in a sling, his face dark with fury. "Faster," Jake called to the driver. The horses broke into a gallop, the stage rocking wildly as it picked up speed. Dust billowed behind them, obscuring the view of their pursuers. "My goodness," the elderly woman exclaimed, clutching her handbag. "Is something wrong?" "Just running a bit behind schedule, ma'am," Cass said smoothly, though his eyes were fixed on the window, watching as Barrett and his men grew smaller in the distance. The businessman frowned. "I've never seen a stage leave in such a hurry." Rosie forced a smile. Perhaps the driver is eager to reach Fort Collins before nightfall. The businessman didn't look convinced, but he returned to his newspaper. Beside Rosie, Cass gradually relaxed as Silver Creek disappeared behind them, though he kept a watchful eye out the back window. "Do you think we made it?" Rosie whispered. "For now," Cass murmured back. "But Barrett won't give up easily. We need to be careful." Rosie nodded, then on impulse took his hand. It was warm and rough, a working man's hand. He looked at her in surprise, then smiled, entwining his fingers with hers. For the next hour, the stage rolled steadily westward, following the road that would eventually lead them to Fort Collins. The elderly woman dozed off, and the businessman was absorbed in his newspaper. Rosie leaned against Cass's shoulder, taking comfort in his solid presence. "I never thought I'd leave Pine Junction," she said softly. "Do you regret it?" Cass asked, a note of worry in his voice. Rosie looked up at him. Not for a second. Relief washed over his face. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "When we get to California, I'm going to do this properly." "Do what properly?" His fingers touched the borrowed ring on her hand. "Ask you to wear this for real." Rosie's heart soared. "I already know my answer," she whispered back. Cass's eyes darkened with emotion, and for a moment Rosie thought he might kiss her right there in the stage. But a sudden shout from the driver made them both start. "Riders coming up fast! The driver called. Cass was instantly alert, peering out the window. "Barrett's men," he said grimly. They must have taken a shortcut through Miller's Pass. The businessman lowered his newspaper, alarmed. What's going on? Are we being robbed? Not exactly, Cass said, drawing his revolver, but you might want to stay down. The elderly woman woke with a start. Oh my, is it Indians? No, ma'am, Rosie said, helping her duck down on the seat. Just some men who don't like my husband very much. The stage picked up speed, the horses at a full gallop now. Outside, Rosie could hear the thunder of pursuing hooves growing closer by the second. If they catch us, Cass said to Rosie, his voice low and urgent, I want you to keep going to Fort Collins. Find Jake's cousin. Don't wait for me. I'm not leaving you, Rosie said fiercely. Rosie, no, she cut him off. We stay together, whatever happens. Before Cass could argue further, a shot rang out. The businessman yelped and ducked lower, covering his head with his newspaper. They're shooting at us, the elderly woman cried. More shots followed. The driver shouted and cracked his whip, urging the horses to even greater speed. The stage rocked, dangerously, threatening to overturn on the rough road. Cass leaned out the window, revolver ready. Stay down, he ordered everyone. He fired twice, then ducked back inside as a volley of shots answered him. There's too many of them, he said to Rosie. At least 6, maybe more. The stage rounded a bend in the road, and suddenly the driver tried out. Rosie felt the stage swerve wildly, then begin to tilt. Cass grabbed her, pulling her against him as the world seemed to spin. With a splintering crash, the stage toppled onto its side, sliding several feet before coming to rest in a cloud of dust. Rosie found herself lying across Cass, his arms still, protective around her. The businessman and elderly woman were a tangle of limbs across from them. Is everyone all right? Cass asked, helping Rosie sit up. The businessman groaned, holding his head where a gash was bleeding. The elderly woman appeared shaken but nodded. We need to get out, Cass said, reaching for the door that was now above them. He pushed it open and pulled himself up, then reached back to help Rosie. Outside, the scene was chaos. The driver lay motionless on the ground, whether dead or unconscious, Rosie couldn't tell. The horses were still hitched but had stopped, snorting and stamping nervously. And approaching at a walk, guns drawn, were Barrett Lyle and his men. Well, well, Barrett called, his voice carrying across the distance between them. If it isn't. The happy couple. Cass positioned himself in front of Rosie, his revolver steady in his hand. Stay back, Barrett. Barrett smiled coldly. Or what, Reed? You'll shoot me like your woman did? I don't think so. You're outnumbered and outgunned. It was true. Barrett had at least 8 men with him, all armed. The lady comes with me, Barrett continued. To you I have no use for. I'm not going anywhere with you, Rosie said, stepping up beside Cass despite his attempt to keep her behind him. I'd rather die first. That can be arranged, Barrett said, raising his gun. But before he could fire, the sound of galloping hooves made everyone turn. A rider was approaching fast from the east, pushing his horse hard. Now what? Barrett muttered. As the rider drew closer, Rosie gasped. Father? William Carrington reined in his horse beside the overturned stage, his face grim, a revolver in his hand. His eyes took in the scene, his daughter standing defiantly beside Cass Reed, Barrett Lyle and his men with guns drawn. Barrett, William said, his voice cold. I understand you've been hunting my daughter. Barrett lowered his gun slightly. William, I'm glad you're here. I was just about to bring Rosalind home to you. Were you? William asked, dismounting. Tom Wilson tells a different story. Barrett's eyes narrowed. Wilson talks too much. Actually, I think he didn't talk enough, William said. He didn't tell me you were planning to marry my daughter despite knowing about your previous wife's unfortunate ends. Barrett's face flushed with anger. That's a dangerous accusation, William. Yes, it is, William agreed. Almost as dangerous as threatening my daughter. He turned to Rosie. Are you all right? Rosie nodded, too shocked by her father's appearance to speak. William looked at Cass, his expression unreadable. And you, Reed? Are you treating my daughter? Well, Cass straightened. Yes, sir. I'd die protecting her. William nodded slowly. I believe you would. He turned back to Barrett. I think it's time you and your men return to Silver Creek, Barrett. My daughter has made her choice. And it's not you, Barrett laughed incredulously. You can't be serious. This man is an outlaw. Is he? William asked. Or is he just a man who was falsely accused? Judge Wilson's watch turned up in his housekeeper's possession last year. Seems she had a grudge against Reed for turning down her daughter's advances. Cass stared at William, in disbelief. Is that true? It is, William confirmed. Though the news wasn't widely shared, Judge Wilson was too embarrassed. He returned his attention to Barrett. So, you see, there's no reason for all this. Barrett's face contorted with rage. I don't care about the watch. She shot me. He pointed at Rosie. She's coming with me and Reed is hanging. No, William said firmly, raising his revolver. She's not, and he's not. Now, you can leave peacefully, or this can get very unpleasant. Your choice, Barrett. For a long moment, no one moved. The tension crackled in the air like lightning before a storm. Then slowly, Barrett lowered his gun. This isn't over, William, he said, his voice tight with suppressed fury. You've made an enemy today. Better an enemy to you than to my daughter, William replied evenly. Barrett jerked his head at his men and they began to back away, returning to their horses. With a last venomous glare at Rosie and Cass, Barrett mounted his horse and rode off, his men following. Once they were out of sight, William holstered his gun and turned to Rosie. You gave me quite a scare, young lady. Rosie stared at her father, hardly believing what she had just witnessed. Why did you come after me? I thought you wanted me to marry Barrett. William's expression softened. I wanted you to be secure. But I was wrong about Barrett Lyle. He looked at Cass. And perhaps about other things as well. Cass stepped forward, his arm still protectively around Rosie. Sir, I never stole that watch. I know that now, William said, and I owe you an apology for believing otherwise. Rosie felt tears prick her eyes. Father, William held up a hand. Later, Rosalind. Right now we need to help these people. He gestured to the driver, who was beginning to stir, and the passengers who were climbing shakily out of the overturned stage. As William moved to assist the elderly woman, Rosie turned to Cass. Did that really just happen? She whispered. Cass looked as stunned as she felt. I think so. Your father just saved our lives. What do we do now? Cass looked at the borrowed ring on her finger, then at the retreating backs of Barrett and his men. I think, he said slowly, that depends on your father. William returned to them after ensuring the other passengers were unharmed. The driver had regained consciousness and was checking on his horses. The stage is damaged, William reported, but the driver thinks it can be repaired enough to get to the next station where they can get another coach. He looked at Rosie and Cass. In the meantime, I'd like to invite you both back to Pine Junction. It seems we have a lot to talk about. Rosie exchanged a glance with Cass. Barrett will still be after us, she said. Let me worry about Barrett, William said. I have some information about his business practices that he wouldn't want made public. I think he'll reconsider his pursuit once I share it with him. Cass cleared his throat. Sir, with all due respect, I was planning to ask Rosie to marry me for real. William raised an eyebrow. Were you now? Yes, sir, Cass said, standing tall despite his obvious nervousness. I love your daughter. I have since the day I met her in that orchard. William looked at Rosie. And you, Rosalind? Is this what you want? Rosie took Cass's hand, feeling the strength and warmth of it around hers. More than anything, Father. William was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to Rosie's surprise, he smiled slightly. Well then, it seems I'll be hosting a wedding after all, just not the one I expected. Relief and joy washed over Rosie. She looked up at Cass, who was staring at William in disbelief. You mean it, sir? Cass asked. You'd give your blessing. I'm not saying it will be easy, William cautioned. Barrett has friends. But yes, if this is what makes my daughter happy, then you have my blessing. Rosie couldn't contain herself any longer. She threw her arms around her father, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered. William patted her back awkwardly, unused to such displays of emotion. Yes, well, don't thank me yet. We still have to get home safely. They helped the driver repair the stage enough to continue to the next station. Rosie couldn't stop smiling. The future that had seemed so dark just days ago now shone with promise. There would be challenges, she knew. Barrett Lyle would not give up easily, and Pine Junction would talk. But with Cass beside her and her father's surprising support, she felt ready to face whatever came. The stage, battered but functional, was finally ready to continue. As they prepared to board, Cass pulled Rosie aside. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "We could still go to California, start fresh, where no one knows us." Rosie touched his face, feeling the roughness of his beard against her palm. "I'm sure. Pine Junction is home, and now with you there, it will truly feel like it." Cass leaned down, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that promised forever. When they broke apart, Rosie smiled up at him. "Besides," she said, "I think I'd like to be married in that apple orchard, under the blossoms like when you stole that first kiss." Cass laughed, a sound of pure joy. "I told you I was a thief," he teased. "I stole a kiss, and I stole your heart," Rosie finished. "Fair trade," Cass murmured, pulling her close once more. From the stage, William cleared his throat pointedly. "If you two are quite finished, we should get moving before Barrett changes his mind and comes back." Hand in hand, Rosie and Cass climbed into the repaired stage. As it rolled forward, continuing its journey but now back toward Pine Junction, Rosie leaned against Cass's shoulder, content. The road ahead would not be easy, but with the man she loved beside her and her father's unexpected support, Rosie knew they would face it together. The kiss she had never forgotten had led her back to Cass, and now it would lead them both home. The journey back to Pine Junction took 2 days, with an overnight stop at a way station. The stagecoach, though damaged, had made it to the next town where they were able to secure fresh horses and make repairs. William had ridden alongside, watchful for any sign of Barrett Lyle or his men, but the banker seemed to have retreated to Silver Creek to nurse his wounds and his pride. For Rosie, the trip felt like a dream. Sitting beside Cass, her hand in his, her father's blessing still ringing in her ears, it seemed too good to be true. She kept glancing at Cass, half afraid he might disappear if she looked away too long. "You're staring again," Cass said softly as the stagecoach rumbled along the familiar road to Pine Junction. Rosie smiled. "I'm afraid I might wake up and find this was all a dream." Cass squeezed her hand. "If it is, then I'm having the same dream." Across from them, William cleared his throat. He had been watching them with an expression Rosie couldn't quite read. Not disapproval exactly, but something thoughtful, perhaps even sad. "We'll be home soon," William said, looking out the window at the passing landscape. "People will talk." You know, let them," Rosie said with more confidence than she felt. The thought of facing the gossips of Pine Junction made her stomach knot, but the alternative, a life without Cass, was unthinkable. "It won't be easy," William continued. "Barrett has friends in town, and a man with money and a grudge is a dangerous enemy." "We know," Cass said, his voice hardening, "but we've faced him once already." William nodded slowly. "Yes, you have. And that's why I believe you can handle whatever comes next." He looked directly at Cass. "You stood beside my daughter when it mattered. That counts for something with me." Cass met William's gaze steadily. "I'll always stand beside her, sir." "See that you do," William said, but there was no threat in his tone. Instead, there was something that sounded almost like respect. The stagecoach crested a hill, and there in the valley below lay Pine Junction. From this distance it looked peaceful, church spire rising above the buildings, smoke curling from chimneys, horses and wagons moving along the main street. "Home," Rosie murmured, feeling a strange mix of emotions. This place had been her prison, but it was also where she had grown up, where she had met Cass in that apple orchard. Now, with him beside her and her father's unexpected support, perhaps it could truly be home. The stagecoach rolled into town just as the afternoon sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon. People stopped to stare as it passed, surprised to see William Carrington in the window. Even more surprised when it pulled up in front of his house and Rosie stepped out, followed by Cass Reed. "Word will spread fast," William said, helping Rosie. "Down. Best to get inside." Mrs. Perkins, William's housekeeper, was waiting at the door, her eyes wide with shock at the sight of Rosie. "Miss Rosalind," she exclaimed, "you're back, and Her gaze moved to Cass, standing protectively close to Rosie. "Yes, Mrs. Perkins," William said calmly. "My daughter has returned, and Mr. Reed is our guest. Please prepare the blue room for him." Mrs. Perkins's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed, "The blue room? For him?" "Yes," William said firmly, "and then please bring tea to the parlor." Still looking stunned, Mrs. Perkins hurried off to do as she was told, though not without several backward glances at Cass. "The blue room is for guests of honor," Rosie explained to Cass as they entered the house. "Father usually saves it for visiting bankers or politicians." Cass looked uncomfortable as they entered the grand foyer with its polished floors and expensive furnishings. "I don't belong here," he muttered. Rosie took his hand. "You belong with me," she said simply, "and I belong with you. The rest doesn't matter." William gestured toward the parlor. "Shall we sit? I think we have much to discuss." The parlor was, as Rosie remembered it, elegant, formal, and slightly cold despite the fire burning in the grate. She and Cass sat side by side on a settee while William took his usual armchair. For a moment no one spoke. Then William sighed. "I owe you both an apology," he said. "Especially you, Reed. I believed Judge Wilson's accusation without question, because it was convenient for me to do so." Cass shifted uncomfortably. "You were protecting your daughter." "No," William said sharply. "I was controlling her. There's a difference." He looked at Rosie. "I thought I knew what was best for you. I was wrong." Tears pricked Rosie's eyes. In all her 25 years, she had never heard her father admit he was wrong about anything. "When you disappeared," William continued, "I was furious at first, then terrified, the thought of losing you." He paused, clearing his throat. "And when Tom Wilson told me what Barrett was planning, I realized I'd nearly handed you over to a monster." "Why did you arrange the marriage in the first place?" Rosie asked, the question that had been burning inside her since the day her father had announced the engagement. William looked away, a flicker of shame crossing his face. "Business," he said simply. "Barrett holds the mortgages on half the farms in the county, including ours." Rosie gasped. "What? But I thought that we were wealthy." William laughed bitterly. "We were once, but bad investments, poor harvests. It adds up. Barrett offered to tear up the mortgage if you married him. I convinced myself it was for your security." He shook his head. "I was a fool." Cass leaned forward. "So the bank could still foreclose? On this house?" "Yes," William admitted. "And Barrett will almost certainly try, now that we've crossed him." "Then we'll fight him," Rosie said firmly. "Together." William smiled sadly. "It won't be that simple, my dear. Barrett has the law on his side. And after what happened at Raven's Bluff," he trailed off, looking at Cass. "He could still press charges against both of you." "For what?" Cass demanded. "Defending ourselves?" "For shooting him," William said bluntly. "It would be your word against his, and he has influence with Judge Wilson." A heavy silence fell over. The room broken only when Mrs. Perkins entered with the tea tray. She set it down with more force than necessary, casting suspicious glances at Cass before hurrying out again. "The gossip has already started," William noted, pouring tea with steady hands. Rosie accepted a cup. "Let them talk." "I don't care." "You should," William cautioned. "In a town like this, reputation matters, especially when you're facing someone like Barrett Lyle." Cass, who had been silent, suddenly spoke. "What information do you have on Barrett? You mentioned something about his business practices." William's eyes gleamed. "Ah, yes. During my time as county commissioner, I became aware of certain irregularities in Barrett's lending practices. Specifically, his habit of changing interest rates after loans were signed." "Is that enough to stop him?" Rosie asked hopefully. "Perhaps," William said, "if enough people came forward, but most are too afraid of losing their farms or businesses to speak against him." "So we're back where we started," Cass said grimly. William set down his teacup. "Not exactly. You have me on your side now. And while Barrett may own half the county, I still have friends in the other half." He turned to Rosie. "More importantly, what do you want, my dear? If you and Reed wish to leave Pine Junction, start fresh elsewhere, I would understand." Rosie looked at Cass, then back at her father. "This is home," she said. "I don't want to run. I want to stay and fight for our place here." William nodded, as if he'd expected this answer. "And you, Reed?" "Where Rosie goes, I go," Cass said simply. "If she wants to stay and fight, then we fight." "Good," William said, looking pleased, "because I have a plan." The next morning, Pine Junction was buzzing with the news. Rosalind Carrington had returned, and with her was Cass Reed, the supposed outlaw who had once been run out of town. Even more shocking, William Carrington had welcomed Reed into his home as an honored guest. By noon, the rumors had multiplied. Some said Rosie and Cass had eloped. Others claimed Cass had kidnapped her, and William had been forced to take him in. Still others whispered that Barrett Lyle had been shot, though accounts varied as to who had pulled the trigger. In the general store, Mrs. Perkins found herself the center of attention as she selected items from William's weekly shopping list. "Is it true?" Mrs. Miller, the butcher's wife, asked eagerly. "Is that Reed boy really staying at your house?" Mrs. Perkins sniffed. "In the blue room, no less. It's not proper, if you ask me." "And Miss Rosalind?" pressed Mrs. Taylor, the sheriff's wife. "How does she seem?" Mrs. Perkins leaned in. "Changed," she said dramatically. "There's a wildness about her now, and the way she looks at that Reed fellow, it's scandalous." The women nodded and murmured, storing away this information to share later with their husbands and friends. "What does Mr. Carrington say about all this?" Mrs. Miller asked. "That's the strangest part," Mrs. Perkins confided. "He treats Reed like he's actually welcome. Even had him at the dinner table last night talking business like they were old friends." "Business?" Mrs. Taylor's eyebrows rose. "What kind of business would William Carrington have with a ranch hand turned outlaw?" Mrs. Perkins shrugged. "I couldn't say, but they were up late in the study, the three of them, with papers spread everywhere." "And what about Barrett Lyle?" Mrs. Miller asked. "I heard he and William had some kind of falling out over Miss Rosalind. More than a falling out, from what I gather," Mrs. Perkins said darkly. "Mr. Carrington sent a letter to Mr. Lyle this morning. Looked very official." The women exchanged meaningful glances. Something big was happening in Pine Junction, and for once it wasn't a harvest festival or a church social. This was real drama, the kind that would be talked about for years to come. At the bank, Barrett Lyle sat behind his massive desk, reading William Carrington's letter for the third time. His face, normally composed, was flushed with anger. His injured shoulder throbbed beneath its bandage, a constant reminder of Rosalind Carrington and her unexpected defiance. A knock at the door interrupted his dark thoughts. "Come in," he snapped. Tom Wilson entered, hat in hand. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Lyle." Barrett gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Wilson. We need to talk about the Carrington situation." Wilson sat nervously. Since his decision to warn William about Barrett's plans, he had been uncertain of his standing with his employer. "What about it, sir?" Barrett tossed William's letter across the desk. "Read this." Wilson picked up the letter and scanned it. His eyes widened. "He's calling in all the Carrington loans for review? Can he do that?" "Technically, yes," Barrett admitted grudgingly. "As a former county commissioner, he has the right to request a review of any loan agreements he signed. It's a formality usually, but in this case..." He trailed off, his expression darkening. "In this case?" Wilson prompted. Barrett drummed his fingers on the desk. "In this case, there are certain adjustments I made to the terms after the initial signing. Nothing illegal," he added quickly, "just good business." Wilson, who had worked for Barrett long enough to know what good business meant, nodded cautiously. "So, what will you do?" Barrett stood and moved to the window, looking out at Pine Junction's main street. "William thinks he's being clever. He thinks he can protect his daughter and that outlaw she's taken up with by threatening my reputation." He turned back to Wilson, a cold smile on his face. "But he's forgotten who holds the power in this town." "Sir?" "The mortgage on the Carrington estate comes due next month," Barrett said. "I think it's time we demanded payment in full." Wilson frowned. "But Mr. Carrington can't possibly..." "Exactly," Barrett cut him off. "He can't pay, which means I can foreclose. Take the house, the land, everything. And Miss Rosalind and Reed." Barrett's smile turned predatory. "Without William's protection, they'll be vulnerable. The girl shot me, Wilson. That's attempted murder. and Reed has been a wanted man for years. It wouldn't take much to convince Sheriff Taylor to arrest them both." Wilson shifted uncomfortably. "What about what Mr. Carrington knows about the loan terms?" "His word against mine," Barrett said dismissively. "And who will believe him when he's lost everything? People respect success, Wilson, not failure." He returned to his desk and sat down. "Now I want you to deliver a message to William Carrington. Tell him I received his letter and will be happy to discuss the loan review after he pays what he owes in full." Wilson hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir." As Wilson left, Barrett allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. William Carrington thought he'd won by turning the tables, but he'd soon learn that Barrett Lyle always came out on top. And when he did, Rosalind Carrington would regret the day she chose Cass Reed over him. In the orchard behind the schoolhouse, apple blossoms drifted, like snow in the gentle spring breeze. Rosie walked among the trees, Cass beside her, their hands lightly touching as they moved. "It hasn't changed," Cass said, looking around at the trees that had witnessed their first meetings 6 years earlier. "Some things don't," Rosie replied, softly. "Like how I feel about you." Cass stopped walking and turned to face her. "Are you sure about this, Rosie? About marrying me? Your father says Barrett will try to take everything, the house, the land." Rosie stepped closer to him. "I've never been more sure of anything. Houses can be rebuilt. Land can be bought. But you—" She placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heart beat beneath her palm. "You're irreplaceable." Cass covered her hand with his own. "I don't have much to offer you. My land at Raven's Bluff is hardly more than a shack and some rocky fields." "It's enough," Rosie insisted. "We'll make it enough, together." For a moment they stood in silence, surrounded by the sweet scent of apple blossoms. Then Cass smiled, a slow, warm smile that transformed his face. "Do you remember the poem I read to you here?" he asked. "That last day before everything happened." Rosie nodded. "Every word." Cass reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn and creased from years of handling. "I've carried this with me since that day," he said, opening it carefully. "I read it when I needed to remember why I left, why I had to stay away to protect you." "Read it to me now," Rosie said, her voice thick with emotion. Cass cleared his throat and began to read. "If ever two were one, then surely we. If ever man were loved by wife, then thee. If ever wife was happy in a man. Compare with me, ye women, if you can." As he finished the poem, Rosie felt tears gathering in her eyes. "Anne Bradstreet," she whispered, "to my dear and loving husband. I always hoped," Cass said, refolding the paper with gentle hands, "that someday those words might apply to us, that you might be my wife and I your husband." "They will," Rosie promised. "They do." Cass cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle. "I want to do this properly," he said, "not just because we're running from Barrett Lyle or because your father has suddenly decided to approve." He took a step back and, to Rosie's surprise, knelt on one knee beneath the apple trees. From his pocket, he withdrew a small, simple ring. Not Jake's mother's ring that she had worn for their disguise, but something new. "It's not much," he said, a touch of apology in his voice. "Just a simple band I bought from the silversmith this morning, but it comes with a promise." He took her hand. "Rosalind Carrington, will you marry me? Not because we're forced to run, not because your father says it's all right, but because you want to share your life with me." Rosie felt a joy so intense, it was almost pain bloom in her chest. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the tears now flowing freely. "Yes, Cass. Reed, I will marry you." Cass slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms. Their lips met in a kiss that held all the promise of their future, sweet, certain, and full of love. When they finally broke apart, Cass rested his forehead against hers. "When?" he asked simply. "Soon," Rosie said, "before Barrett can cause more trouble. This weekend here in the orchard." Cass nodded. "Your father?" "He'll agree," Rosie said confidently. "He knows we can't wait." Hand in hand, they walked back through the orchard toward town, the apple blossoms continuing to fall around them like blessings from above. William Carrington sat in his study, reviewing the household accounts with growing concern. The numbers didn't lie. Barrett Lyle had them in a vice grip. Even if they sold everything of value in the house, they wouldn't have enough to pay off the mortgage when it came due. A knock at the door interrupted his grim calculations. "Come." "In," he called. Rosie entered, her face glowing with happiness. "Father, we need to talk to you." Behind her came Cass, looking both nervous and determined. William noticed their clasped hands, the new ring glinting on Rosie's finger. "I see congratulations are in order," William said, gesturing for them to sit, "though I'd already assumed you two were engaged." "We want to make it official," Rosie said, sitting across from her father's desk, "and we want to marry this weekend in the orchard behind the schoolhouse." William raised his eyebrows. "So soon? What's the rush?" Rosie and Cass exchanged glances. "Barrett Lyle," Cass said simply. "The longer we wait, the more time he has to cause trouble." William sighed. "He's already started. Tom Wilson delivered a message this morning. Barrett is demanding full payment of the mortgage by the end of the month." Rosie's smile faded. "Can we pay it?" "No," William admitted. "Not unless a miracle occurs. The farm hasn't turned a profit in 3 years, and most of our assets are tied up in land that's now worth less than what we owe." "Then we'll lose the house," Rosie said quietly. "Most likely," William agreed, "unless my plan works." Cass leaned forward. "Your plan? You mentioned it yesterday but didn't explain." William smiled thinly. "Because it's somewhat unorthodox and risky." He pulled out a folder from his desk drawer. "These are copies of loan agreements Barrett has made with various farmers and businesses in the county. Note the interest rates." Cass examined the papers. "They're different," he said, frowning. "Higher than what's standard." "Yes," William said. "But look at these." He produced another set of documents. "These are the same loans but with different terms. Barrett has been altering the agreements after they're signed, raising interest rates without informing the borrowers." Rosie gasped. "That's fraud." "Exactly," William said grimly. "And it's been going on for years. I became suspicious when I was county commissioner, but couldn't prove anything. Then last year, Sam Jenkins came to me with both copies of his loan, the original and the altered version. He'd found the altered one by accident when Barrett's clerk gave him the wrong file. So that's why you threatened a loan review," Cass said, understanding dawning. "To expose Barrett's fraud?" William nodded. "If enough borrowers come forward with their original loan documents, Barrett could face criminal charges. At the very least, he'd lose his banking license." "But will people speak up?" Rosie asked skeptically. "They're afraid of him." "They are," William acknowledged. "Which is why I've been visiting them one by one, showing them copies of the altered loans. It's slow work, but I'm making progress." "Is that what you were doing all those evenings you said you were at business meetings?" Rosie asked. William looked slightly ashamed. "Yes. I was building a case against Barrett. Initially because I thought it might give me leverage in your marriage arrangement. Then when you ran away to protect you." He shook his head. "I should have told you." "It doesn't matter now," Rosie said. "What matters is stopping Barrett before he can hurt anyone else." William's expression turned serious. "It won't be easy. Barrett has friends in high places, including Judge Wilson. And he'll fight dirty when cornered. So will we," Cass said, his voice hard. "For Rosie's sake and for everyone else he's cheated." William studied the young man before him, seeing for the first time not the ranch hand who had stolen a kiss from his daughter, but a man of principle and courage. "Very well," he said at last. "I'll continue gathering evidence. In the meantime, we'll proceed with your wedding plans." Rosie beamed. "Thank you, Father." "Don't thank me yet," William cautioned. "Barrett won't take this lying down, especially when he hears about the wedding." As if on cue, Mrs. Perkins appeared at the door. "Mr. Carrington," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Sheriff Taylor is here to see you, and Mr. Lyle is with him." William stood, his face grim. "Show them in, Mrs. Perkins." Rosie and Cass exchanged alarmed glances, but remained seated. This confrontation had been inevitable. Better to face it head-on. Moment later, Sheriff Taylor entered, looking uncomfortable. Behind him came Barrett Lyle, his arm still in a sling, his face a mask of cold fury. When he saw Rosie and Cass, his eyes narrowed dangerously. "William," Barrett said, ignoring the others, "I see you received my message. I did, William replied calmly, though I didn't expect a personal visit, especially with the sheriff in tow. Sheriff Taylor cleared his throat. This isn't an official visit, William. Mr. Lyle asked me to accompany him, that's all. Did he indeed? William said dryly. And why is that, Barrett? Afraid to face us alone after what happened at Raven's Bluff? Barrett's face flushed. I'm not afraid of anything, William. Especially not your daughter or her outlaw lover. Cass tensed, but Rosie placed a restraining hand on his arm. What do you want, Barrett? William asked directly. Barrett smiled coldly. What's mine? The full amount of your mortgage due by the end of the month, or I'll be forced to foreclose, and if I pay? Then we're square, Barrett said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Of course, there's still the matter of your daughter shooting me. He turned to Sheriff Taylor. I believe attempted murder is a serious charge, Sheriff. Sheriff Taylor shifted uncomfortably. Now, Barrett, I'm not sure. It was self-defense, Rosie interrupted, her voice steady. You were going to shoot. Cass, I had no choice. Barrett's smile didn't reach his eyes. That's not how I remember it. And I have 8 men who will testify to my version of events. Your paid thugs, you mean? Cass said, standing, against the word of Rosie, me, and Jake Miller in Silver Creek. Jake Miller, Barrett scoffed, a stage driver with a drinking problem. Very reliable witness. William moved around his desk to stand between Barrett and the others. I think you should leave now, Barrett. We'll discuss the mortgage at the bank during business hours. As for any charges against my daughter, I suggest you think very carefully before proceeding. Barrett's eyes narrowed. Is that a threat, William? A reminder, William said mildly. About those loan reviews I mentioned in my letter. I've been making good progress gathering evidence. Interesting how many people kept their original loan documents. For the first time, Barrett looked uncertain. You're bluffing. William opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder. Am I? Perhaps you'd like to look through these copies. Sheriff Taylor might find them interesting as well. Sheriff Taylor frowned. Copies of what, exactly? Nothing, Barrett said quickly. Just William's attempt to distract from the real issue, his daughter's crime and his unpaid debts. William smiled thinly. If you say so, Barrett. But my offer stands. Pay the mortgage in full, and we'll forget about the loan reviews. Continue to threaten my daughter, and I'll take these documents to the State Banking Commission. A tense silence fell over the room. Barrett's eyes darted from William to the folder, calculating. This isn't over, he finally said. Not by a long shot. He turned to leave, then paused to look at Rosie. Enjoy your time with Reed while you can, my dear. It won't last. As Barrett stalked out, Sheriff Taylor lingered. William, he said quietly, whatever you're planning, be careful. Barrett has a lot of influence in this town. So do I, William replied. And right is on my side. Sheriff Taylor nodded, though he didn't look convinced. Just watch your backs, he advised before following Barrett out. When they were gone, Rosie let out a shaky breath. He's not going to give up, is he? No, William said grimly, which is why we need to move quickly, both with the wedding and with gathering more evidence against him. Cass put his arm around Rosie protectively. We'll be ready for whatever he tries. William looked at the young couple, seeing their determination and courage. Perhaps, he thought, his daughter had chosen better than he ever could have. We'll start tomorrow, he decided. Rosie, make whatever arrangements you need for the wedding. Cass and I will continue contacting Barrett's victims. The more evidence we have, the stronger our position. Rosie nodded, then hesitated. Father, if we lose the house, then we lose the house, William said firmly. It's just a building, Rosalind. What matters is that we stand together, as a family. Family. The word hung in the air, full of meaning. For the first time in years, Rosie felt truly connected to her father, and with Cass by her side, the future, uncertain as it was, held more promise than fear. As a family, she agreed, reaching for Cass's hand. Outside the study window, the sun was setting over Pine Junction, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. A new day would dawn tomorrow, bringing with it challenges and choices. But for now, in this moment, they were united against whatever might come. Barrett Lyle, however, was not a man to accept defeat. As he left the Carrington estate, his mind was already working, plotting his next move. William might think he held the advantage with his loan documents, but Barrett had other weapons at his disposal. He would bide his time, watch for an opportunity. And when it came, he would strike, not just at William, but at what the man held most dear, his daughter and the man she loved. As night fell over Pine Junction, the stage was set for a final confrontation, one that would determine not just the fate of Rosie and Cass, but of the town itself. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of activity. Rosie, with Mrs. Perkins's reluctant help, prepared her mother's wedding dress, letting out seams and replacing yellowed lace. William and Cass continued their visits to Barrett's victims, building their case one loan document at a time. The town buzzed with gossip. Everyone had an opinion about Rosalind Carrington marrying Cass Reed in the apple orchard behind the schoolhouse. Some called it romantic, others deemed it scandalous. But beneath the chatter ran an undercurrent of tension. Barrett Lyle's fury was well known, and many wondered what he might do to stop the wedding. The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and bright. Apple blossoms covered the orchard trees like fresh snow, just as they had 6 years earlier when Cass had given Rosie her first kiss. It seemed fitting that they would exchange vows in the same place where their love had begun. In her bedroom at the Carrington house, Rosie stood before the mirror, hardly recognizing herself. Her mother's dress, ivory with age but still beautiful, hugged her figure before flowing to the floor in a cascade of satin and lace. Mrs. Perkins had woven apple blossoms into her upswept hair, a crown of spring to match the orchard. "You look like her," William said from the doorway, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mother." Rosie turned, surprised to see tears in her father's eyes. William Carrington rarely spoke of his late wife, as if the pain of her loss was still too fresh even after 20 years. "Do I really?" Rosie asked softly. William nodded, entering the room. "She would be proud of you, Rosalind. Proud of your courage and your heart." He paused, then added quietly, "I am." Tears threatened to spill from Rosie's eyes. "Thank you, Father." William cleared his throat, regaining his composure. "Are you ready? The Reverend is waiting in the orchard, and Reed, Cass, he's been pacing for an hour." Rosie smiled, thinking of Cass in his borrowed suit, nervous but determined. "I'm ready." William offered his arm. "Then let's not keep him waiting any longer." Together they descended the stairs and stepped out into the spring sunshine. A small group of well-wishers had gathered in front of the house, neighbors and friends who had chosen to support Rosie despite Barrett Lyle's obvious disapproval. They cheered as Rosie emerged, calling out blessings and good wishes. William had arranged for a carriage decorated with ribbons and flowers to take them to the schoolhouse. As they rode through town, Rosie noticed faces watching from windows and doorways. Some smiled and waved, others quickly ducked out of sight. Pine Junction remained divided in its loyalties. "Any sign of Barrett?" Rosie asked, scanning the street anxiously. William shook his head. "Not since our confrontation in the study. He's been quiet, too quiet for my liking." "Do you think he'll try to stop the wedding?" William's expression hardened. "Let him try." Sheriff Taylor agreed to attend as a guest. "And I've asked some of our supporters to keep watch." The carriage rounded the corner, and the schoolhouse came into view. Beyond it lay the orchard, where Rosie could see a small gathering of people. Her heart quickened at the thought of Cass, waiting there for her. As they pulled up to the schoolhouse, Jake Miller stepped forward to help Rosie down from the carriage. He had arrived from Silver Creek the day before to stand with Cass as his best man. "You look beautiful, Miss Carrington," Jake said with a grin. "Reed's a lucky man." "Thank you for coming, Jake," Rosie said warmly. "It means a lot to Cass, and to me." Jake's expression turned serious. "I've got men watching the roads. If Barrett or his boys show up, we'll know." William nodded approvingly. "Good man, let's hope they're not needed." They made their way around the schoolhouse to the orchard, where chairs had been arranged in rows, facing an arch woven with apple blossoms. Beneath it stood Reverend Collins, a kind-faced older man who had baptized Rosie as a baby. And beside him, looking more handsome than she had ever seen him, stood Cass. He wore a dark suit that William had insisted on having tailored for him, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved, but it was his eyes that caught and held Rosie's, gaze, dark and warm and full of love. The small group of guests stood as Rosie and William began their walk down the makeshift aisle. Apple blossoms drifted down around them, and somewhere nearby a bird sang a sweet, clear melody. To Rosie it felt like a dream, one from which she never wanted to wake. When they reached the arch, William placed Rosie's hand in Cass's, a symbolic gesture of his blessing. For a moment, the three of them stood together, united against the world that had tried to keep them apart. "Take care of her," William said to Cass, his voice carrying in the quiet orchard. "With my life," Cass promised. William nodded, then stepped back, taking his seat in the front row. Rosie and Cass turned to face Reverend Collins, their hands still joined. "Dearly beloved," the Reverend began, "we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." As the ceremony continued, Rosie was aware only of Cass beside her, his hand warm and steady in hers. The words of the service washed over her like a blessing, familiar yet made new by the depth of emotion she felt. When it came time for the vows, Cass turned to face her, his eyes never leaving hers. "I, Cass Reed, take you, Rosalind Carrington, to be my wedded wife," he said, his voice clear and strong, "to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Rosie's voice trembled slightly as she repeated the vows, but her heart was steady and sure. This was right. This was where she belonged. "The rings, please," Reverend Collins said. Jake stepped forward, producing two simple gold bands. Cass had insisted on buying them, despite William's offer of Rosie's mother's ring, saying he wanted to start their life together with something that was truly theirs. Cass slipped the smaller ring onto Rosie's finger, where it nestled against the silver engagement band he had given her in the orchard. Rosie, in turn, placed the matching band on Cass's hand, feeling a surge of pride and possession as she did so. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Collins said, smiling broadly, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." He winked at Cass. "You may kiss your bride." Cass didn't hesitate. He drew Rosie into his arms and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart swell. Around them, the guests burst into applause and cheers. Apple blossoms continued to fall, dusting their shoulders and hair with delicate petals. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, Rosie felt as though her happiness might lift her right off the ground. They turned to face their guests, hands clasped tightly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reverend Collins announced, "may I present Mr. and Mrs. Reed?" More cheers erupted. William was the first to approach, embracing his daughter and shaking Cass's hand with genuine warmth. Jake followed, slapping Cass on the back and kissing Rosie's cheek. One by one, the guests came forward to offer congratulations. In the midst of the celebration, Sheriff Taylor approached, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday best. He shook Cass's hand, then leaned in to speak quietly. "Congratulations to you both," he said. "But I thought you should know. Barrett Lyle left town early this morning. Took the stage to Silver Creek." Rosie and Cass exchanged worried glances. "Did he say why?" Cass asked. Sheriff Taylor shook his head. "Not to me, but Tom Wilson mentioned something about getting reinforcements. I thought you should be warned." "Thank you, Sheriff," Cass said seriously. "We appreciate it." As Sheriff Taylor moved away, William joined them, having overheard the conversation. "So Barrett's making his move," he said grimly. "I expected as much." "What do we do?" Rosie asked, her earlier joy dimmed by this news. William's expression was determined. "We celebrate your wedding, and then we prepare. Barrett won't catch us." Off guard again, they did their best to enjoy the small reception that followed in the schoolhouse. Mrs. Perkins had prepared a feast, seemingly warming to the occasion despite her earlier reservations. There was music and dancing, laughter and toasts. For a few hours, the threat of Barrett Lyle receded into the background. As evening approached, Cass led Rosie outside for a moment of quiet amidst the celebration. They stood beneath an apple tree, its blossoms glowing pink and white in the fading light. "Are you happy, Mrs. Reed?" Cass asked, his arms around her waist. Rosie smiled up at him. "Happier than I ever thought possible. Even with Barrett Lyle plotting against us." Cass's expression turned serious. "I promised to protect you, Rosie. I meant it." "I know," she said, touching his face gently. "But we'll face him together. Whatever comes." Cass nodded, then leaned down to kiss her again, a kiss full of promise and passion. When they returned to the schoolhouse, their eyes were bright and their cheeks flushed. The celebration continued until sunset, when Cass and Rosie departed in the flower-decked carriage for the Carrington house. William had insisted they stay there until they decided where to settle permanently. As they drove through town, people called out congratulations or watched silently from doorways. "A town divided," Cass observed, "half cheering for us, half waiting for Barrett to return and put us in our place." Rosie rested her head on his shoulder. "They'll come around. Once Barrett's fraud is exposed, people will see him for what he really is." Cass kissed the top of her head. "Your father's determined to make that happen." "We all are," Rosie said firmly. "It's not just about us anymore. It's about everyone Barrett has cheated and bullied." As the carriage pulled up to the Carrington house, a sense of peace settled over Rosie despite the uncertainties that lay ahead. She was Cass's wife now. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side. Barrett Lyle's return to Pine Junction 3 days later caused a stir. He came not on the regular stage, but in a private coach, accompanied by 4 hard-faced men whom no one in town recognized. They took rooms at the hotel, and Barrett was seen entering and leaving Judge Wilson's house late at night. Word spread quickly. The Reeds and William Carrington kept to the house, continuing their work of gathering evidence against Barrett. Each day, more of his victims came forward, bringing loan documents and stories of manipulation and threats. "We're close," William said one evening as they sat in his study surrounded by papers. 5 more testimonies, and we'll have enough to present our case to the State Banking Commission." "Will they listen?" Cass asked skeptically. "Barrett has friends in high places." "Not as many as he thinks," William replied. "I've been corresponding with the commissioner himself. He's very interested in what we've uncovered." Rosie, who had been sorting documents, looked up. "How long before we can make our case?" "A week, maybe 2, William estimated. "The commissioner is sending someone to interview the victims personally. Until then, we need to stay vigilant. Barrett won't go down without a fight." As if to prove William's point, a messenger arrived the next morning with a letter bearing the bank's seal. William read it aloud at the breakfast table, his expression darkening with each word. "Barrett is calling in all loans held by those who attended your wedding," he said grimly. "He's giving them 48 hours to pay in full or face foreclosure." Cass's hand tightened around his coffee cup. "He's punishing them for supporting us and sending a message to anyone else who might be thinking of coming forward," Rosie added. William folded the letter carefully. "He's desperate. He knows we're building a case against him." "What do we do?" Rosie asked. William stood, decision made. "We accelerate our timeline. Cass, ride to Silver Creek today. The banking commissioner's representative is staying at the Grand Hotel. Bring him back here with all the evidence we've gathered." "What about you?" Cass asked. "I'll visit the loan holders Barrett is threatening. Assure them we're close to exposing him and ask them to hold firm for just a few more days." "And me?" Rosie asked, unwilling to be left out. William considered. "Stay here. Continue organizing the documents and be careful. Barrett may try to get to the evidence while Cass and I are gone." Though reluctant to be separated from Cass so soon after their wedding, Rosie nodded. The work they were doing was too important to delay. Cass left within the hour, promising to return as quickly as possible with the commissioner's representative. William departed soon after, leaving Rosie alone in the house except for Mrs. Perkins, who was busy in the kitchen. The day passed slowly as Rosie meticulously organized the loan documents and witness statements. By late afternoon, her eyes were tired from reading the small print, and she decided to take a break. She was just pouring herself a cup of tea when a knock came at the front door. Assuming it was one of the loan holders coming to speak with her father, Rosie went to answer it. But when she opened the door, she found herself face to face with Barrett Lyle. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Reed," he said, his voice silky with false politeness. "Or do you prefer Rosalind? I'm never quite sure with newly married women." Rosie's hand tightened on the doorknob. "What do you want, Barrett?" Barrett smiled coldly. "A moment of your time. May I come in?" "My father and husband aren't here," Rosie said, making no move to admit him. "I know," Barrett replied. "That's why I came now. What I have to say is for your ears only." Warning bells rang in Rosie's mind, but curiosity got the better of her. What could Barrett possibly want to say to her alone? "5 minutes," she said, stepping back reluctantly. In the parlor, Barrett entered, his gaze sweeping the foyer as if assessing the value of everything in sight. Rosie led him to the parlor, leaving the door open so Mrs. Perkins would hear if there was any trouble. "Please sit," she said, gesturing to a chair while taking a seat opposite, the tea table between them. Barrett sat, still smiling that unsettling smile. "Congratulations on your marriage," he said, "though I must say I'm surprised a woman of your upbringing would settle for a man like Reed." "Cass is worth 10 of you," Rosie said coldly. "Now state your business and leave." Barrett's smile vanished. "Very well, directly to the point. I know what you, your father, and your new husband are doing. Gathering evidence, building a case against me." He leaned forward. "It won't work." "We'll see about that," Rosie replied, maintaining her composure despite the rapid beating of her heart. "No, we won't," Barrett said, "because you're going to stop. Right now. You're going to tell your father and Reed to drop this foolish crusade and leave Pine Junction." Rosie raised an eyebrow. "And why would we do that?" Barrett reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. "Because if you don't, I'll use this." He placed the document on the tea table and slid it toward Rosie. With cautious fingers, she unfolded it. It was a warrant for Cass's arrest, signed by Judge Wilson. "For what?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the fear blooming in her chest. "Attempted murder," Barrett said smoothly. "Mine, specifically. Dated the day you shot me at Raven's Bluff." "I shot you," Rosie said. "Not Cass." Barrett shrugged. "Not according. Tow my men. They'll all swear they saw Reed pull the trigger, and Judge Wilson believes them." He smiled again, seeing the horror in Rosie's eyes. "The penalty for attempted murder is hanging, Mrs. Reed. Is your little investigation worth your husband's life?" Rosie stared at the warrant, her mind racing. "This is blackmail." "Call it what you will," Barrett said, rising from his chair. "You have until tomorrow to decide. Either you and your family leave Pine Junction forever, or I give this warrant to Sheriff Taylor and your husband hangs." He adjusted his coat. "Oh, and don't think about running. I have men watching the roads." He moved toward the door, then paused. "You know, Rosalind, all this could have been avoided if you'd simply married me as your father arranged. Think about that while you decide." With that, he left, letting himself out. Rosie remained seated, the warrant clutched in her trembling hands. What Barrett was proposing was monstrous, but could she risk Cass's life on the chance that the banking commissioner would believe their evidence over Judge Wilson's warrant? Mrs. Perkins appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "Miss Rosalind, Mrs. Reed, I mean." I couldn't help overhearing. "What are you going to do?" Rosie looked up, determination replacing fear in her eyes. "I'm going to fight, Mrs. Perkins. Would you please saddle my horse? I need to find my father." William Carrington was at the Miller farm when Rosie found him. He had spent the day visiting the loan holders Barrett had threatened, urging them to stand firm just a little longer. The Millers, like most, were afraid, but willing to trust William's assurance that help was coming. When Rosie arrived, her face flushed from hard riding, William knew immediately that something was wrong. "Rosalind? What's happened?" he asked, excusing himself from the Miller's kitchen table. Wordlessly, Rosie handed him the warrant. William read it quickly, his expression darkening. "Barrett came to the house," Rosie explained. "He said if we don't drop our investigation and leave Pine Junction, he'll give this to Sheriff Taylor." William swore under his breath, something Rosie had rarely heard him do. "It's a false charge. You shot him, not Cass." "His men will swear." "Otherwise," Rosie said, "and Judge Wilson has already signed the warrant." William paced the Miller's front porch, thinking rapidly. "We need to get Cass back from Silver Creek before Barrett realizes he's gone." "And then what?" Rosie asked. "Run? Hide? That's not a life, Father." William stopped pacing and looked at his daughter, seeing in her face a determination that mirrored his own. "No, it's not," he agreed. "But neither is watching your husband hang for something he didn't do." "There must be another way," Rosie insisted. "What about the banking commissioner? If we can get him to Pine Junction before Barrett acts. That was the plan, William said. But now, he trailed off, looking again at the warrant in his hand. Mrs. Miller appeared in the doorway, her kind face concerned. Is everything all right? William hesitated, then made a decision. Mary, can I impose on you for one more favor? I need to send a message to Sheriff Taylor. It's urgent. Mrs. Miller nodded. Of course, my boy can ride into town right away. While Mrs. Miller called her son, William quickly wrote a note, sealed it, and handed it to the young man with instructions to deliver it directly to Sheriff Taylor and no one else. What did you tell him? Rosie asked as they watched the Miller boy ride off. To meet us at the Carrington house tonight at 8, William replied. It's time to bring him fully into our confidence. Can we trust him? Rosie asked skeptically. He works for Judge Wilson, who's clearly in Barrett's pocket. Taylor's a good man at heart, William said, and he has his own reasons to distrust Barrett. We'll have to hope that's enough. They rode back to the Carrington house together, the afternoon sun casting long shadows before them. Rosie couldn't help scanning the road and the woods on either side, half expecting to see Barrett's men waiting to ambush them. But they reached home without incident. Mrs. Perkins met them at the door, wringing her hands in distress. Thank goodness you're back, she said. There's been men watching the house, strangers. They rode off when they saw you coming. William's expression hardened. Barrett's men, no doubt. Keep the doors locked, Mrs. Perkins, and let us know if you see them again. In the study, William and Rosie reviewed their options while waiting for Sheriff Taylor to arrive. The simplest solution would be for you and Cass to leave, William said reluctantly. Start fresh somewhere Barrett can't reach you. And abandon everyone here to his mercy. Rosie shook her head. I can't do that, Father. We've come too far. William smiled sadly. You're your mother's daughter. She never backed down from a fight either. He sighed. Very well. We continue as planned. But we need to warn Cass before he returns. How? Rosie asked. We can't send a rider to Silver Creek without Barrett's men seeing. Before William could answer, the sound of horses approaching made them both tense. Moving to the window, William peered out cautiously. It's Sheriff Taylor, he reported. Alone, it seems. Moments later, Mrs. Perkins showed the sheriff into the study. Taylor removed his hat, looking uncomfortable but resolute. I got your message, William, he said. What's this urgent matter? William gestured for him to sit, then explained everything. The loan fraud, the evidence they had gathered, and now Barrett's threat to have Cass arrested for attempted murder. Sheriff Taylor listened without interrupting, his weathered face giving away little of his thoughts. When William finished, the sheriff sat in silence for a long moment. I've suspected for years that Barrett was crooked, he finally said, but there was never any proof, and Judge Wilson always backed him. We have proof now, Rosie said eagerly. Dozens of altered loan documents, testimonies from the victims. Taylor nodded slowly. That's good, but it doesn't solve our immediate problem. He looked at the warrant, which William had placed on the desk. This is legal, signed by a judge. If Barrett brings it to me officially, I'd have no choice but to execute it. Even knowing it's based on false testimony? William demanded. Taylor spread his hands helplessly. That's for a court to decide, not me. I'm just the sheriff. Rosie felt despair creeping in. So, you won't help us? I didn't say that, Taylor replied. I said I'd have to execute the warrant if it's brought to me officially. He emphasized the last word, a hint of a smile touching his lips. William leaned forward. What are you suggesting, Sheriff? I'm suggesting, Taylor said carefully, that warrants have been known to go missing before they're officially presented, especially when they're based on false charges. Understanding dawned on William's face. You'd do that, risk your badge? Taylor shrugged. I've been sheriff in Pine Junction for 20 years, seen a lot of things I didn't agree with but couldn't. Stop. Maybe it's time I did something that actually matters. Rosie felt a surge of hope. Thank you, Sheriff. Don't thank me yet, Taylor cautioned. This only buys us time. Barrett can always get another warrant. He leaned forward. What we need is to neutralize Barrett permanently. When is this banking commissioner due to arrive? Cass went to Silver Creek today to bring him back, William explained. They should return tomorrow or the next day. Taylor frowned. That may be too late. Barrett's gathering his forces. Word in town is he's planning something big. What kind of something? Rosie asked, alarmed. Taylor shook his head. I don't know, but his men have been buying supplies, like they're preparing for a siege or a long journey. William and Rosie exchanged worried glances. Could he be planning to intercept Cass and the commissioner on the road? William asked. It's possible, Taylor admitted. The road from Silver Creek is isolated in places. Easy place for an ambush. Rosie stood, unable to contain her anxiety. We have to warn them. How? William asked again. We can't send a rider without Barrett knowing. Sheriff Taylor stood as, well, decision made. You can't, but I can. Official business. Checking reports of bandits on the Silver Creek Road. No one would question it. You'd do that? Rosie asked, hope rising again. Taylor smiled, a genuine smile this time. Mrs. Reed, I've watched you grow up in this town, seen how your father tried to protect you in his own way. And I've heard stories about Reed for years, not all of them bad. If you two have found happiness together, I'm not going to let Barrett Lyle destroy that because of his wounded pride. William extended his hand. Thank you, Sheriff. We won't forget this. Taylor shook William's hand firmly. I'll leave at first. Light. With luck, I'll intercept Reed and the commissioner before they get too close to Pine Junction. And the warrant? William asked. Taylor patted his pocket. What warrant? I never saw any warrant. As Sheriff Taylor departed, Rosie felt a weight lift from her shoulders. They had an ally now, an important one. What do we do while we wait? She asked her father. William's expression was grim but determined. We prepare for Barrett's next move. Whatever it is, it won't be good. The next day passed in tense anticipation. William continued organizing the evidence against Barrett, while Rosie kept watch from the upstairs windows, looking for any sign of Sheriff Taylor returning with Cass and the commissioner. Barrett's men were more visible now, riding openly past the Carrington house, making no attempt to hide their surveillance. It was a form of intimidation, William said, Barrett letting them know he was watching their every move. As evening approached with no sign of Sheriff Taylor or Cass, Rosie's anxiety grew. They should have been back by now, she said, pacing the parlor. Something's wrong. William, though equally concerned, maintained a calm facade. The road from Silver Creek is long, and they may have been delayed. Sheriff Taylor will find them. But as night fell, with still no word, even William's composure began to crack. He was just suggesting they send Mrs. Perkins to check with neighbors when the sound of horses approaching made them both rush to the window. In the moonlight, they could make out 3 riders coming up the drive. As they drew closer, Rosie's heart leaped. It was Cass, Sheriff Taylor, and a third man she didn't recognize. She ran to the door, flinging it open as Cass dismounted. Without a word, he swept her into his arms, holding her tightly as if afraid she might disappear. Thank God, he murmured into her hair. When Sheriff Taylor told me about the warrant, I'm fine, Rosie assured him. We're all fine, but what took you so long? We've been worried sick. Barrett's men, Sheriff Taylor explained, as he and the third man dismounted. They were watching the road. We had to take a detour through Miller's. Pass, William joined them, shaking hands with the third man. Mr. Stevens, I presume, William Carrington. Thank you for coming. Stevens, a small, precise man with spectacles and a neat beard, nodded. The commissioner was most disturbed by your evidence, Mr. Carrington. He sent me to investigate immediately. They moved inside, where Mrs. Perkins had prepared a late supper. As they ate, Sheriff Taylor explained how he had intercepted Cass and Stevens just outside Silver Creek. Barrett's men were already there, he said, watching the hotel waiting for you to leave. We slipped out the back way and took the long route home. Have they followed you? William asked, concerned. I don't think so, Taylor replied. We were careful. Stevens, who had been examining some of the loan documents while he ate, looked up. This is most irregular, he said. If these alterations are as widespread as you claim, Mr. Lyle could face serious charges. They are, William confirmed, and we have witnesses ready to testify. Stevens nodded thoughtfully. I'll need to interview them all and examine the original documents. How quickly can you arrange this? Tomorrow, William said decisively. I'll send word first thing in the morning. Cass, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. And what about Barrett? He's not going to sit by while we dismantle his empire. The warrant has disappeared, Sheriff Taylor said with a small smile, and without Judge Wilson's signature on a new one, Barrett can't touch. You legally. When has that ever stopped him? Cass asked darkly. An uncomfortable silence fell around the table. Barrett Lyle was not a man to accept defeat, especially at the hands of those he considered beneath him. The warrant had been only one weapon. In his arsenal, what else might he try? As if in answer to their unspoken question, a commotion outside broke the silence. The sound of horses, many of them approaching at speed. Sheriff Taylor was on his feet instantly, peering out the window. Barrett, he confirmed grimly, and at least a dozen men with him. William moved to his desk, unlocking a drawer and withdrawing a revolver. Mrs. Perkins, he called, take Mr. Stevens upstairs. Stay there until we call for you. The housekeeper, pale but composed, nodded and led the banking representative toward the stairs. What do they want? Rosie asked, though she already knew the answer. Us, Cass said simply. Me specifically, dead or alive. Sheriff Taylor checked his own weapon. They won't take you without a fight. William handed a second revolver to Cass. We stand together, as a family. Outside, Barrett's voice rang out in the night. Carrington, Reed, come out and face me like men. The four of them exchanged glances. Then, with grim determination, they moved to the front door. William opened it, revealing Barrett Lyle mounted on a black horse surrounded by his men, some from Pine Junction, others strangers with hard faces and hands that never strayed far from their guns. This is a surprise, Barrett, William called, his voice steady. A bit late for a social call, isn't it? Barrett's face was twisted with fury. Where is it, Carrington? Where's the warrant? What warrant? William asked innocently. Barrett's eyes narrowed as he spotted Sheriff Taylor standing beside William. You, he spat. You're supposed to uphold the law, not obstruct it. I am upholding the law, Taylor replied calmly. The real law, not your version of it. Barrett turned to his men. Search the house. Find that warrant and the evidence they've been gathering against me. Before any of them could move, William raised his revolver. This is my property, Barrett. You and your men are trespassing. I suggest you leave before this gets ugly. For a moment, no one moved. The tension crackled in the air like lightning before a storm. Then Barrett laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. You're outnumbered, Carrington. 4 against 12. Those aren't good odds. 5 against 12, came a new voice from the darkness. Jake Miller stepped into the light, rifle in hand. And the odds are about to get worse. From the shadows around the Carrington house emerged more figures, farmers, shopkeepers, working men from Pine Junction, all armed, all looking at Barrett. With grim determination. What is this? Barrett demanded, his confidence faltering for the first time. Justice, Jake said simply. These men are all victims of your fraud, Barrett. They've come to stand with the Carringtons and Reed. Barrett looked around wildly, counting at least 20 men now surrounding his group. Some of his own men were shifting uncomfortably in their saddles, clearly having second thoughts about the confrontation. This is madness, Barrett blustered. I'm a respected businessman. You can't believe the lies these people have been spreading about me. We've seen the proof, called Sam Jenkins, stepping forward. Both copies of our loan agreements, the ones we signed and the ones you altered. We know what you've been doing, Barrett. Murmurs of agreement rose from the gathered men. Barrett's face paled in the moonlight as he realized the extent of the opposition. And there's more, William added, his voice carrying across the yard. Mr. Stevens from the State Banking Commission is here, Barrett. He's seen the evidence. It's over. Barrett's composure cracked. It's not over until I say it's over, he shouted, drawing his revolver. Reed, this is all because of you. If you'd just stayed away from Pine Junction, none of this would have happened. In one fluid motion, he aimed at Cass and fired. The shot went wide as Sheriff Taylor tackled Cass to the ground. Chaos erupted as Barrett's men scattered, some fleeing, others drawing weapons. Hold your fire, Sheriff Taylor shouted to the townspeople. No one else shoots. But Barrett was beyond reason. He fired again, this time at William, who ducked behind a porch column. The bullet splintered wood where his head had been moments before. Rosie, who had been pulled inside by Cass when the shooting started, broke free and ran back onto the porch. Stop it, Barrett, she cried. It's over. Barrett turned toward her. Voice. his face contorted with rage and defeat. "You," he snarled. "This is all your fault. You should have been mine." He raised his gun once more, aiming directly at Rosie. Time seemed to slow. Cass shouted, lunging toward her. William raised his revolver. Sheriff Taylor took aim. But it was Jake Miller, steady-handed Jake, who fired first. The shot rang out in the night and Barrett jerked backward in his saddle, a look of surprise crossing his face. Then he toppled slowly to the side, falling to the ground with a heavy thud. For a moment no one moved. Then Sheriff Taylor was beside Barrett, checking for signs of life. He looked up, his expression grim. "He's gone," he announced. Barrett's remaining men, seeing their leader fallen, threw down their weapons and raised their hands in surrender. The townspeople moved in, securing them quickly. Cass held Rosie tightly, his heart pounding against hers. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Rosie nodded, unable to speak. She had caused a man's death, not directly this time, but it had been her defiance, her refusal to marry Barrett that had led to this moment. William joined them, putting a comforting hand on his daughter's shoulder. "It's not your fault," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "Barrett made his choices, all of them." Sheriff Taylor approached, holstering his weapon. "It was a clean shot," he said to Jake. "Self-defense. He was about to kill Mrs. Reed." Jake nodded, his face pale but resolute. "I'd do it again." As the initial shock wore off, the practical matters of death intruded. Barrett's body was taken to the undertakers, his men to the jail. Mr. Stevens, who had witnessed everything from an upstairs window, promised a full report to the banking commissioner. "The fraud investigation will continue," he assured William. "Barrett's death doesn't change the facts. His victims will see justice." The townspeople, their immediate purpose served, gradually dispersed, though many promised to return in the morning to give formal statements to Mr. Stevens. Jake stayed, unwilling to leave his friends after what they had been through together. In the quiet of the parlor, with the night's violence behind them, Rosie finally found her voice again. "Is it really over?" she asked, looking from her father to Cass to Sheriff Taylor. "Barrett is gone," Sheriff Taylor said. "His network will fall apart without him, and once the Banking Commission's findings are made public, any influence he had left will vanish." "What about Judge Wilson?" Cass asked. "He'll face his own investigation," Stevens interjected. "The commissioner is very interested in how a judge came to sign a false warrant." William sighed, the weight of the day's events evident in his face. "It will take time for Pine Junction to heal from Barrett's influence, but it will heal." Rosie looked at Cass, finding strength in his steady gaze. "And us? What happens now?" Cass took her hand, his thumb gently rubbing the wedding band he had placed there days earlier. "Now," he said softly, "we live our life together." "Where?" Rosie asked. "Here? Raven's Bluff?" Cass looked to William, a question in his eyes. William smiled, understanding. "The Carrington land has been in our family for generations," he said. "It's too much for one man to manage alone. I could use a partner, someone with a strong back and a good head for business." Cass's eyes widened. "Are you offering me a partnership?" "I'm offering my daughter and her husband a home," William corrected. "And yes, a partnership, if you want it." Cass looked at Rosie, silently asking her opinion. She smiled, tears of joy replacing the earlier tears of fear and grief. "Yes," she said simply. "This is home, with both of you." Cass turned back to William. "Then yes, sir, I accept." The three of them stood together in the quiet parlor, a new family forged through hardship and love. Outside, the night was still, the stars bright over Pine Junction, a town that would wake tomorrow to a new day, free from Barrett Lyle's shadow. Spring turned to summer, and summer to fall. The Carrington-Reed partnership flourished, bringing new life to land that had been neglected for years. The Banking Commission's investigation confirmed everything William had claimed about Barrett's fraud, and his victims received compensation from the bank's assets. Judge Wilson resigned in disgrace when his collusion with Barrett came to light. Sheriff Taylor remained, more respected than ever for his stand against corruption. And Pine Junction, after the initial shock, settled into a new normal, one where the Carrington house was home to not just William, but to his daughter and her husband as well. On a crisp October afternoon, Rosie stood in the apple orchard behind the schoolhouse. The trees were bare now, their blossoms long gone, but she could still see them in her mind's eye, white and pink against blue sky, falling like snow around a first kiss. "Remembering?" Cass asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. Rosie leaned back against him, smiling. Always. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. So much had changed since that desperate night when Rosie had cut the hem of her dress and ridden to Raven's Bluff. She had been running away then, from Barrett, from a life she didn't want. Now she was exactly where she wanted to be, with the man she had chosen. "Any regrets?" Cass asked, his voice soft against her ear. Rosie turned in his arms to face him. "Only that we lost 6 years, but we have the rest of our lives to make up for it." Cass smiled, that slow, warm smile that still made her heart skip a beat. "The rest of our lives," he repeated. "I like the sound of that." He leaned down to kiss her, a kiss as sweet as their first beneath these same trees, yet deeper, richer with all they had experienced together. When they broke apart, Rosie looked up at him, her eyes shining. "You stole a kiss from me once," she said. "Remember what I told you that night at Raven's Bluff?" Cass's expression softened. "You said you wanted the last one too." Rosie nodded. "And I will. Many, many years from now." "Is that a promise, Mrs. Reed?" Cass asked, his voice husky with emotion. "It is," Rosie said, reaching up to touch his face. "The kiss you stole was just the beginning. The last one. That's for when we're old and gray with a lifetime of memories between us." Cass drew her close again, his heart full. "Then we'd better start making those memories," he murmured, before claiming her lips once more. As the sun set over Pine Junction, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Rosie and Cass walked, hand in hand, back toward the Carrington house. Their house now, their home. Behind them, the apple orchard stood waiting for spring, for new blossoms, for the cycle to begin again. Just as their love had begun again, stronger than before, ready to weather whatever storms might come. Together, the end.